there are 1,000 choices between you and success, and I cannot promise you that the success you'll get at the end is the one you originally thought. It may or may not be, but I can tell you that if you keep aiming for impact in every single choice, cumulatively, you will have an outsized career.
I think you gotta have a dream.
The School of Greatness.
Really? Yeah.
Please welcome Lewis Howes.
What would make this the most powerful interview you've ever done?
That's a really hard question. I'm thinking about the answer, and very rarely do I say don't have an answer. I could say candor, we're going to have candor. I could say engagement, we're going to have engagement. I'm trying to think about like what message, maybe the most powerful thing would be like, the whole reason I wrote the book is not for money, right? It's to land the idea that people have just a total misconception about how risk and reward work. So like maybe if you and I landed an interview that sort of like brings that home, that kind of singular message, and people take it, maybe. I don't know. It's a really high bar. What would make it, like you've done 1,100 plus interviews. Yeah. What would make this a home run for you? Let's ask that question. It's probably the same challenge.
That we go deep on things that maybe we wouldn't necessarily go deep on, that we get vulnerable, that we reveal things, both of us, that connect to people's hearts.
Okay.
That we get out of our heads.
Awesome.
And tap into the soul.
Okay. If you want to tap into the soul, you have to ask me about my father.
Okay. Yeah.
If you want to go like straight there,
I'm watching stuff about your dad. Yeah.
Like because I think like the book is a business book that has an undercurrent of how I was raised. But if you flipped it, I would say like Seed of the Soul is more my book than
I just had Gary
Zukov. I know.
So he's great.
So if you think about the messages in Seed of the Soul, I remember I went to an event that Sheryl Sandberg hosted with Oprah at our house back in the Valley when she used to do these events that were like 25 women, and Oprah came. And Oprah was talking about Gary Zukov's book. And that was the first time I heard of it. You know, she was and so I read Seed of the Soul. And I just remember reading it. I was like, wow, like this book, this is like the way I was raised. So if you if you want to talk about soulful stuff, like that's the stuff I talk about with my coach and my,
That's what's going to move my audience. The analytical, heady stuff, they're going to be, they don't come here for that.
Then let's talk about the soulful stuff, like how you live your life, because I am totally down for that conversation. Okay. So if you said, like, what's the deepest we can get? The deepest we can get is, like, why are we all here? Yeah. What are the experiences you have that, like, convince you that there's something more, like, or something, like, and for me, just to be clear, and now you're going to get me, Terry, like, I fundamentally believe that the way I'm going to express all my gifts or impact on the world is through business. 100%. Yeah. 100%. And my father definitely saw that in me. He was like, that will be the way. Wow. And he was the most religious, spiritual person I know, and also impactful, and also the most entrepreneurial. So, like, I just look at it. I'm like, that's the standard. So if you read my book, you'd be like, I don't like being like, oh my hero is Richard Branson, or like, of course I admire all these, but I'm like, no, my hero's my dad. Like his life and his purpose and his vocation and his impact were all the exact same thing.
Wow.
Right, completely integrated.
That's cool. Aligned.
Completely integrated and aligned.
That's cool.
Yeah, which is not a conversation I have with most people. I have it with my coach. I have it with my priest. I have it with my mom. My mom read the book, and she said, because I hadn't told her I wrote the book, I was like, you know what, I need to tell her. And then she was like, what are you so busy with? I was like, Mom, I'm writing a book. I wrote a book, and I want to give it to her for Mother's Day, so I gave it to her. And she called me yesterday, and she's like, I finished the book. I was like, great. What'd you think? And then she started sobbing. And she said, I read the acknowledgments. I'm like, well, I'm like, hopefully you feel acknowledged. And she said, but I also read the last chapter in the book, which is all about your father. And she just was like bawling her eyes out. And she's like, you never talk about this stuff. But she's like, I read it and I think like, sorry, you can get me teary. I read it, I think like, you must think about him all the time. I'm like, all the time.
Wow.
And she said, and then she was crying. She's like, he was the love of my life. I told you he was a special person, and the whole world saw him as a special person. I was like, yeah, of course. I'm like, that last chapter is exactly what I believe, and I think about my dad all the time. And she's like, it was beautiful. She's like, but it just made me remember how much I miss him. And sorry. Anyway, so like, you want to get deep? Wow. That'll be deep.
When you think about your dad, what do you think about?
I think about the integration, as we talked about. I think about, and I write about it in the book, I think about the fact that like most people move through this world, including all the people you and I know, and they really think that power is to be harnessed, right? Like, power is to be harnessed. And my dad, like, he just gave like I call the concept in the book power flow. Most people like dream of being powerful. I'm like, my father was the most powerful person I know. I'm like, but it's because had power flow. He was like this abundant source of energy, right? So you bring it, like, he could just give energy away to people. You know what I mean? He never said I, ever. Like I say I all the time. He just never said I.
What did he say?
He would just be like, well, what do you want? Like, I just don't know how to describe it. He talked about like, he just helped people connect with their purpose, and he made them feel really good. You know those people who are like, when you're with them, they're so present that they make you feel like their time with you is like a gift to you.
Yeah.
So my father was that person, right? You could have a conversation, and there was nobody who didn't leave a conversation with him just totally energized, like 100%. Nobody would feel bad about themselves. They just left great. People say to me like, "Oh my God, you like have so much energy, you make me feel anxious or nervous or like whatever." Like my dad just made everybody feel more full of themselves. Right? That was his gift. And so I call that power flow. I'm like, like once you understand that like energy that you have is to be given away, because you know it's a pretty abundant. If you can generate it for yourself, you can just keep giving energy to other people. Right? So that was his gift.
Power flow.
I call it power flow, not powerful.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm like, so why you all want to harness power? Like, people think you're powerful. I'm like, people would say my dad was the most powerful person they knew. He could give a about like holding power. I don't even think he would think about it that way. I'd just be like, just like keep flowing from him. And the more that flow from him, the more that would like, amass to him, right? But he didn't care about being powerful. I'm just saying that was his impact, right? If you can make other people impactful, like think about that gift.
What were the 3 biggest lessons he taught you growing up?
Possibilities in small acts as well as big acts.
Possibilities in small acts.
As well as big acts. Okay. We tend to think of like risk-taking and possibility as like, if you can't do something big, don't do it at all, right? But what if possibility is like, for sure he was an entrepreneur, so I think that he would say possibilities in little acts. Like, it might be in doing your taxes. It might be in, trying to come up with a creative name for your medical practice, which he did. It might be like helping your daughter build like, a working model of the human eye in the 2nd grade, which he did with me. So I just felt like he was always striving for possibility in little and big things. So like possibility had all these dimensions, little and big, little big, little big.
Yeah.
As opposed to like waiting for one big act, right? That was one big
lesson.
Yeah, one big lesson. Like number 2, probably that we're all meant to express some sort of like you're here to give purpose and service to other people, right? So he would never say like, what does that need to be? He just like exemplified it. I don't know how to.
It's his way of being.
It's his way of being. Like when somebody
he didn't say it, he just wasn't.
Yeah, he just wasn't. Like there's like conversations about these things, right? It's just like you see this living embodiment of it. So I'd say that his 2nd lesson was probably about just like you're here to be of service and to have impact, right? So I think that's probably 2nd lesson. Maybe the 3rd. Yeah, maybe the 3rd is something much more simple. I mean, my parents just told me that, like, if you think it's all about you, you're totally mistaken. Like, it's not like quite destiny, but like, you live in a universe that's far more powerful than you. And like, you think you're in control of everything, you're in control of nothing. So, and it's weird, right? Because you can say, how can you live with somebody who says, well, like the whole universe is moving around you. If you think it's all about you, you're wildly mistaken. So my dad had this way of understanding that like we're small in a very big universe, yet still making you feel empowered, right? So that's an interesting lesson.
You're insignificant, but you're significant.
Yes, you're insignificant, but everything is possible. You understand? And so I understand both those things. I'm like, I can both say like, hey, I feel completely empowered, yet I realize like if I think this act is all about me, like that's a totally ridiculous statement.
Right.
That's why I feel like, I love leaders like that, right? They're very confident and yet they're very humble.
Yes.
Like because and my father was that. Like he was like the most confident, like grounded in himself person I could ever imagine. Yet complete humility. Because he's just like, I'm a speck on the back of a universe for a period of time. Yet while you're here, do something useful. So both can be true, right? You can both be insignificant, yet while you're here, you're meant to do something totally significant.
Is there a conversation that you really repeat in your mind over and over that he either shared with you, whether it was an intentional conversation or something he said, off the cuff that really resonates and sticks with you still?
No, it's interesting. I honestly can say it's not a single conversation because, like I said, like there were no lectures at our table. It was like it wasn't my dad was like, you must do this or whatever. Like he would say it constantly, and I think I'm very guilty of this. So he would literally say, like, why you ever begin sentences with it? Like, I. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he wouldn't say that, he wasn't scolding me. He was just like, this just reminder that, like, I do it all the time. We do it. Like, I am so, you know what I mean? But he just kind of had the absence of ego. So, no, I honestly, there was no big talk conversation. There was just no, like, seminal moment where he sat me down and told me these things. It was just like, it's just like just watching him be.
Yeah.
But, like, there's a story in the book that I tell that is very emblematic of my father. This is what I mean when I say small acts of possibility for other people, right? So my dad was a doctor. He loved being a doctor. And
what type of doctor?
He was a general practitioner, but he also loved being an entrepreneur. Like, he loved both. And and he grew up in Africa and immigrated to Canada late in his life. And so one of his dear friends passed away, but his son was like my age, like a teenager, and came to stay with us for like one summer. He lived in England and came to stay with us. So we get, family friend's son comes to stay with us. We become close to him, this kid, Bobby. And Bobby went on and became a surgeon. And
your dad's son or your dad's friend's son?
My dad's friend's son.
Gotcha.
Just friend of family, so I got to know Bobby. And my dad's funeral, you can probably tell my dad was pretty religious. So the church we follow, believe it or not, is in England. So multiple times a year, we would go to England.
Really?
Yeah, and literally live in the church and do service like twice a year. So like when other people went to Disneyland, I mean like literally
You're
Christmas
there for
vacation.
a week.
And summer, we would go to England, live at this church, because my dad was like not atheist but agnostic, but then he had this like spiritual awakening in his early 40s.
So he didn't follow a specific religion, but he
we're
followed
Sikh. He followed. Yes. He was curious about all religions and believed generally in God.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, this is why I'm like, we're getting way deep here. So maybe you want to.
No, this is great. This is fascinating.
But
so he was interested in all religions.
Interested in all religions, but Sikh, like I'm Sikh. Turbans, what have you. But I think sometime in his early 40s, before I was born, met a man who he became his physician, who was the head of a Sikh church. And he literally thought he met the embodiment of God. So like overnight, my mom says like he came home and he was a changed man. He stopped drinking, he stopped like gambling, he got baptized in the Sikh religion, and he began following this person. And
Before he wasn't Sikh though.
He was Sikh, but he wasn't orthodox.
He wasn't all in.
Yeah, he wasn't all in. Like he was turban, he was cultural. Yeah. He was Sikh, but like loosely Sikh. Yes. He didn't want to get baptized. It's like becoming the equivalent of like, you're Jewish and then you're Orthodox Jewish, right? So he was generally interested in religion and curious about the world and all those things, but then he literally met a man who changed his life. And so he became his physician. He started following him. My mom was like overnight, he just like became uninterested in all sorts of material things and became much more spiritual.
Wow. What do you think that was? That he saw or witnessed, or that he said to him that just woke him up? He
literally said he felt like he was a saintly person. He literally said like, I feel like I met a saint.
Wow.
And so that saint founded a specific Sikh church. There's Sikhs all over the world. And in England, he moved from Africa to England, and he has a church that has thousands of people. So my dad subscribed to that church. So we all did. We still do.
Right.
And so anyway, my point overall is that you said sort of, so we all subscribed to this church. Bobby's dad was at this church. So my dad literally passed away in an airport in England because he had a heart attack.
Oh,
when
man.
It's okay. It was 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah, he like I said, he would go to the church 2 times a year, right? So even after we grew up, my dad and my mom.
To the church?
No, he was at the church. The church had rented a plane at Heathrow Airport, and they not rented a plane. They were all on the same plane flying to Kenya and Africa to do service. To do service. Like literally, our church does service in India and Africa. So they were all flying to Africa together, and my dad and my mom were going. And I was in my 20s, and my dad was in the airport, and he had a heart attack.
Oh my gosh!
Because he was just tried to get to the gate too fast,
and
he passed away at Heathrow, and passed
man.
away in the airport. Anyway, but the benefit of that whole thing is my dad was in England at the church that he loved when he passed.
Wow.
So we flew there for the funeral.
Oh wow!
So at his funeral, Bobby, who I saw after many years, was
the
a
saint.
surgeon. No, Bobby, the son of a friend. The saint had long passed, and successor saints run the church. Bobby, the son of my dad's good friend, who became a surgeon, who had come to visit us, right? So I knew Bobby. We're in our teens. He comes, hangs out. I go on and have my grown-up life. Bobby has his grown-up life, but my dad sees Bobby all the time because he visits England twice a year, and Bobby's at the same church. So he knows Bobby's story. Bobby goes on to medical school, becomes a surgeon, what have you. Anyway, I see Bobby at my dad's funeral. He's like, did I ever tell you the story about your dad? I was like, what story, Bobby? No, you didn't. He's like, well, you remember I visited you in Canada, and then I was thinking about what to do with my career, and I was thinking about, becoming a doctor and becoming a surgeon. And so I sought out your dad one year when he was like visiting the church in England. I was like, what do you think? And he said, you know what your dad did for me? I was like, no, what did he do? He's like, he took both my hands, he turned them up and down, and he looked at me, he's like, and he just like said to me with this like big deep smile, he's like, Bobby, these are the hands of a surgeon.
Wow.
And like just like me, like a little act, like nothing to him. Bobby's like, I always remember it because he looked me in the eye and he gave me this big smile and he's like, Bobby, and he turned my hands up. He's like, these are the hands of a surgeon. He's like, and then I went to medical school and I became a surgeon. And he's like, I always remember that point with your dad.
Wow, it's beautiful.
That was my dad. So it's no like sit down, big lecture, like just lots of conversations and like gems like this everywhere. So like clearly like something for Bobby triggered, right? He's like, oh, like he just told me I should go become a surgeon, or like he gave me a blessing or something.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yes.
Dude, what are we doing? Like we're supposed to talk about the book.
This is the book.
It is. But it is the undertone of the book.
Of
like
course.
this book is like
this
the
is what's made you
business.
Who you are.
Yeah,
It's
but
part of
this
you.
book is the business manifestation.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by your story, and obviously the story of your father has made a massive impact on who you've become as a human being. And it seems like without his presence and his being, you wouldn't be the successful person you are. You wouldn't be the caring, mother, partner, executive, all these things that's driven you here.
No, and look, I appreciate you're getting to the heart of it, but the reality is, as we discussed, the reality is just that, I think if we can come to a place in our lives where what we do and who we are integrated,
Absolutely.
that's sort of like, right, that's the highest.
That's authentic power.
Right, that's authentic power. It's what we talked about. And so whenever people ask me about these lessons, they're so intertwined.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I know that most people, I see a lot of people who think about like what I do is different from who I am, and I have a very hard time separating the two, obviously, as you can tell.
Explain that more.
Well, I
like
think,
your job is not who you are?
Yes, your job is not who you are, right? So if you think about like you spend, and by the way, I'm not saying like have a job with like that leaves you with like no perspective on, what's important in your life, right? But I'm saying that who you are at work and how you express your gift is as important. Think about spending 10, 12 hours a day at something, finding a passion at work that expresses who you are. And as I keep coming back to your unique gift and strength for impact, yeah, I think that's very purposeful.
It's
and I think
yeah.
a lot of people think like, oh, there's my day job and how I make money. And then there's, what I care about. And I'm like, well, my example in my lifetime, not just my dad, by the way, we give him a lot of credit, but my mom, she was a doctor as well. She was an entrepreneur. She didn't love entrepreneurship the way my dad did, but she loved serving people. I'm like, why can't they be integrated? Why shouldn't they be integrated?
Right.
Right. So So obviously I'm somebody who takes work too personally, while I think other people maybe have more distance from it. But I think it's all a reflection
Where they're
of how
like,
I grew up.
well, this is my job, and then I come home and I live my authentic life.
Yes, exactly.
But what if you could live your authentic life all the time?
All the time. And by the way, we all look.
And there's going to be things you don't enjoy doing about your work or your job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like everyone. But if you could be yourself and use most of your gifts in that role,
it would be great, right?
That's powerful.
Yeah, and of course, and we live in an era where most people want to go to work and feel, even more so than ever, that who they are is welcome and that they are included and what their values are fit. And I want the same thing. But this is not to suggest, by the way, I live some perfectly integrated life.
Right.
I'm like, this is making, this has a risk of people thinking
Yes.
that I'm really good at this. What I would say is this is to your point, this is my intention and this is my worldview. So, as I said, I'm pretty convinced that the way I'm meant to express my gifts is through business, and that's totally okay and more than okay.
Yes. How do you express your gifts in business?
Well, I think you do it
How do you personally do it?
How do I personally do it?
Like when you're leading a company,
how
are
do
you
it?
expressing your gifts?
Well, two things. I try and bring three things to any situation in business. Number one, I wake up most days feeling pretty grateful for the amazingly talented people I get to work with.
Yes, your team.
And so I guess when I work as CEO, I think of like both leverage and my gift is making other people able to be even more successful and think of themselves and accelerate their journey.
Yes.
Right? So I think I have that gift because I don't think I wake up every day thinking I'm the best person in the room. I think I wake up every day going like, wow, these are really talented people. And so what I know I can do for people is give them energy and excitement and passion and help them maybe drive faster than they thought they could go.
Right.
So I think that's one of my unique gifts.
That's great.
Number two, again, not that I think I'm so smart, but I love consuming information. I like thinking fast and acting fast. And so I like to think that, maybe a conversation, with me is one where people learn faster and where I learn faster. Like that's so it's not just my gift, right? It's what I enjoy.
Yes.
So I love interactions where you and I, like we have this interaction, we both leave. And it's like a super rewarding interaction, right? I consume a lot of information. I can give you insight, you can give me insight, and off we both go. And so I think I'm pretty good at consuming information and helping people give insight and gain insight by just asking lots of questions. So I think I process information. That's a gift, I think. But it's a gift to be used, right, to help accelerate outcomes for people and for businesses.
Right.
Those are probably the two big ones, just processing power and, passion, energy, ability to get people excited and make them realize that they're capable of more.
What are the three most interesting questions you think we should be asking other human beings? Whether it be in business or life in general, what do you think are three most fascinating questions?
Yeah, I think these are, I think the questions to ask yourself, first and foremost, I think everybody should ask themselves, what are my unique gifts? Like, as we talked about, like I think that these, this is a question I would ask you, but it's a question I think you should ask yourself, right? Like, what are my unique gifts? Because I think that when we can articulate what those are, it's not like we're full of ourselves in a bad way. We understand how maybe we can have the most impact.
Yeah.
And we seek out environments where that impact can be kind of known, seen, practiced, and realized. So I think that is the number one question people should ask themselves is, what are my most authentic gifts? Number two, and of course, I don't know about others, I feel like I believe people should deeply know what they're not great at. And not just what are my unique vulnerabilities, not in the areas I have, that will always be my work to improve. Like this is what my point. Like I sound like I'm sitting on some pedestal. I'm not. I can tell you, like my kids, I drive them crazy.
Yeah.
Like all of these same things that are gifts, as you know, have an edge to them that are pretty brutal, right? My kids would be like, Mom. Like,
what are your unique vulnerabilities?
Well, they all are the downsides of my edges, right? I would wish that, like my father, I could make people feel, I know I can make people feel energized, but that same energy makes people feel pretty nervous, right? It has a dark side where it's like people can feel like, well, am I not enough? Like, what do I do to keep up with Sukhinder? Like, that's not really the point, right? I'm not here to make you feel less of yourself.
Right.
I'm here, so I speed people up. Do you know what I mean? You start talking, I start talking, people are going faster, faster. So I'm pretty impatient.
Yeah.
So if you have high energy and it's always trying to be deployed, you're pretty impatient, right? You may not wait for someone to finish their sentence. You make somebody else feel nervous. So that will always be my work, right? And that is the downside of being a highly energized person, controlling that energy and that passion, right? So it's always at its most productive edge. That is it by a mile. That is that will be my work. And I have lots of other vulnerabilities, and lots of you and I both agree vulnerability is a good word, so I hate using that word.
Yes.
I have lots of other areas for development.
Areas for growth.
Areas for growth, tons, right? But I would say what I'm aware of in myself is that one vein sprouts so many,
Sure.
It's like the root of a lot of evils, right? So that's probably my biggest by far.
Okay, and then the third question we should all be asking.
And the third question I would say that people should ask themselves, I think it's maybe not a question you ask once, it's a question you ask it's a question you ask many, many times, which is what's possible now?
In just any area of life.
In any area, if you stopped and said, what's possible now that I'm not doing? Because I think that people, remember we started this conversation, I said people think the possibilities in big acts.
Right.
And I think possibilities in small acts. So if I see it, if it's what's possible today? Maybe that's the question. What's possible today? If I wanted to find more joy in a certain area, if I want to find more joy at work, what's possible today? If I wanted, and by the way, again, make no mistake, it's not like I'm perfect at this practice, right? I'm sure there's lots of things I should do, and I'm like, what's possible at home that I'm not doing today? But I do think that, there's a lot of power in small acts and starting now, right? And to your point, getting in that imperfect motion, right?
Yeah.
Versus waiting for the day where every possibility will be perfect. That day never comes.
Never, yeah.
It never comes. So I think if you ask yourself what's possible today, you probably unlock something today, right? I'm not saying any of us are going to be able to unlock it all in our, I live no perfect day where I unlock all the possibilities in my life. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do know the power that comes from unlocking even one possibility.
Right. That sounds like, that's the lesson you said from your dad as well. Yeah. Small and big possibilities.
Yeah.
When do you feel the most loved?
When do I feel the most loved?
When you're doing or receiving what?
We all feel loved differently. Well, first and foremost, for me, I feel the most loved when I feel accepted for who I am.
Gosh, I was having this conversation this morning with someone.
You were?
Literally an hour ago. I was like, I'm so grateful and appreciative to be around people that fully accept me for who I am. Don't judge me. Don't try to change me.
Yeah.
But accept my authentic power.
Yes, that's totally right. And I would say I feel completely loved when people accept me for who I am, including my imperfections.
Yes.
And maybe also I feel loved when people see who I am. Right? So we'll leave this conversation and I'll reflect on it. And it's like, oh, that person saw a lot more of me. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
So I think when people see us fully, we feel loved.
Gosh,
right?
It's so true. Why does it seem like in general there are a lot of us who surround ourselves with people who don't accept us fully? Or why does that happen?
Well, first of all,
stay in friendships or relationships
where
someone doesn't fully accept the other person.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, first of all, remember that on the other side of that equation is somebody else who's also looking for acceptance.
Right.
So it's never like a one way, right? So while we're all going through our own journeys, looking for to be seen and loved, so is the other person. So I think part of the reason, it's sort of like ships in the night, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody is looking to be seen. So maybe what that means is when we stay in relationships, yes, we're hoping to be seen, but the other person is hoping the same thing. And maybe neither of us are engaging in an authentic enough conversation with the other. Or, we're so used to looking for it ourselves. And you're right, it's a surprise that we don't stop to give it to the other person. And maybe it's a two-way relationship. I don't know. It's a good question. Oh yeah. I mean, you could give I'm sure you have many more capable people on this podcast on this question than me. I'm not a psychologist. I am not, all I can come to is, when we love ourselves, obviously, two things happen. Number one, maybe we have our own renewable source of energy that's enough. So while we want to be seen by other people, when we love ourselves, right, we come to any relationship able to do two things more. Number one, see other people. You know what I mean? You're not so starved yourself that all you want to do from that relationship is take. But you can see other people and ask them the questions about how they want to be seen. But we all still want to be seen as well. So I think I'm just rambling. I don't think I have a good answer to your question.
I like this. Was there a moment when you fully fell in love with yourself?
I don't think I'm fully in love with myself even now.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm very...
fully love and accepted yourself, not from an ego standpoint.
Yeah, no, I understand. No, I mean, look, I still have all the same work everybody else does. I still wake up with imposter syndrome. I still wake up... Of course, I still wake up ashamed of some of the things I have, not ashamed, not shame in the bad, ashamed of the things I haven't achieved or, the impact I still haven't had. Look, the book is an attempted impact, right? So clearly I'm still striving to do something. But I would say, so I don't consider myself all the way there by any stretch.
What do you feel an imposter about?
I feel like an imposter in the good way, like lots of people do. Every time... Look, I think if you're somebody who wakes up and says, my job is to have impact, right?
It's never finished.
No, it's never finished. And if you have the humility to understand that you are as we talked about, you're a speck in this universe, right? Yeah, most days I just want to wake up and make the most of the time I have. I realize it's finite and that I think I'm here for some purpose. That's what I was trained to believe by my own family spiritually, we're all here for some purpose to give. Then mostly I'm just constantly worried that I'm not fulfilling that promise. So so it's not a bad kind of right? It's not I wake up and say I don't accept myself. It's more I was wow, if I'm not pushing myself to do more and to have more impact, then I'm not really taking full advantage of why I'm here. So that's the kind of, and so So by that definition, you're always putting yourself in situations where you may not be enough. But you realize the only way like you're going to have the impact you want is if you put yourself at risk to go. And so if you put yourself at risk, you feel like an imposter. You're like, oh, because you're practicing some act you've never done yet, right?
Yes.
So anyway, it's like I'm good with it. Like I'm good with it.
Right.
So to your point, I don't
You're
like
not beating
fully
yourself.
myself up.
Yeah.
I don't beat myself up. I've mostly accepted that I have a worldview that says it's okay to be imperfect. It's okay that I never feel fully, capable. I'm pretty comfortable with being personally uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's okay. Yeah. I feel like that's a way to, pursue impact. And, so if I'm uncomfortable, but I get the chances and more impact, isn't that worth it?
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on the culture of like, I consider you a high achiever, a high performer, you're in high executive positions, running big companies. And you mentioned something about like, am I creating more, am I doing enough or creating more impact? What about the people that say, I want to do less. I want to have like less stress, less worry. How can I create more without the pressure and the stress or anxiety that might seem to come with it? How can I create it and also have inner peace? Is that possible as someone in your position as a high-level CEO and executive and running billion-dollar companies? Is it possible to have inner peace while also creating massive impact?
Sure. So like as an example, I identified for you. First of all, here's why this is why I think it is possible. You talked about this idea of self-love and acceptance and understanding like what drives you and who you are and why you're here. Like, I may not be peaceful every day, but I am at peace.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
So I think it's different for different people. Like, I just want to be clear. Like, I'm good with being a CEO. I'm good that that's my path of impact. I am good that there is a higher universe that I may or may not achieve everything I want. Like I am like totally good with it. So I consider myself at peace because I know that anything may come my way and it will be okay.
Right.
Like, look, I could fail miserably and I'll be okay because I have a very good sense of like my sense in the universe that I am loved by God. Literally that I am loved, that I am, I'm a full human being, that I am, Anyway, so I think that if you say, how do you find peace? Look, peace means different things for different people. For me, peace means that I am in a role and every day waking up and have a way to express my gifts. That for me is peaceful. You know when I don't feel peaceful? I don't feel at peace when I don't know what it is. So does that make sense? So my zone may be a zone of anxiety because every day I think I'm pushing myself to express my gifts. But I'm at peace with that. So I don't know, it depends what you mean by peace. There are people for whom being present in a moment, expressing who they fully authentically are is completely different. And so I think peace means different things to different people. For me, I'm at peace when I'm going 100 miles an hour.
Right.
Because that to me
chaos is ensuing.
And not even chaos, but I'm in pursuit of impact and purpose, right?
Yeah.
Fully.
And that can
I'm
be messy.
fully functioning.
And that can be messy.
And it's messy, but maybe part of my gift is I can deal with mess. If you're a CEO, you deal with mess all the time. You deal with grit. You deal with big possibility and small possibility. You deal with problems. You deal with people being upset. So maybe that's part of my gift, right? That I can handle all those things.
You can hold the space for thousands of employees' problems and ups and downs and challenges. And
that's right. And maybe that's part of what I'm meant to do, right, in the world to help people. And by the way, there's many different ways to express your gifts, as we'll come back to. So is it possible to be a CEO and be at peace? Yes, it depends on what you're pursuing. And I think to be at peace with yourself, you just need to know not what makes you happy, what makes you fulfilled. What gives you fulfillment? And for me, the pursuit of impact gives me fulfillment.
How does someone discover what their unique gift is if they don't know what it is?
I would say to people, if you don't know what it is, ask.
Ask someone else.
Ask somebody. Ask the people who know you the best.
Ask what? What's my gift?
What's interesting. So I'll give you an example. People are like, so when I give business talks, people, I start any conversation with do you know your superpowers? And whether it's MBAs or new grads or CEOs, a third of the room puts up their hand, which I find annoying. Not annoying and not annoying in a bad way, but kind of, I'm annoying for the older people, not the young people. I'm okay, if you're telling me that you've gone this far in your career and you're being falsely modest, that's not that helpful. Because if you're a leader and you don't know what your gifts are or your areas of vulnerability, how do you ever? You need to know, right? Yeah. So that's false modesty. And if you're younger, I say, if you don't know, ask the people around you, what do you think I'm uniquely gifted at? And I think sometimes the answers will surprise you, but you'll find the threads of who you are. So I don't think that we're really good when we're younger at getting feedback on who we are and what makes us shine. What we get feedback on is, are we good in school, or are we smart, or what have you. But like what your unique gifts are, I think your friends and family and even your colleagues will use 2 or 3 words to describe you. So you may not say, what's my unique gifts? You're just like, like, what do you think I'm great at? Or where do you think I shine? And I think you'll hear words that come up again and again and again from all the people in your life that know you professionally and personally.
That's interesting.
And I just don't think people move through the world with that, with that understanding.
Yeah. Do you think we should be pursuing fulfillment then in our gifts over happiness?
I guess I believe that fulfillment can lead to happiness. Like I think, and I think that an impact can lead to happiness. And I know there are other people who are like, hey, just be happy in what you're doing every day and the tasks of what you do, and that leads to fulfillment. And I think it's bidirectional. Like if you want to pursue happiness and happiness gives you fulfillment, great. If you want to pursue fulfillment and fulfillment gives you happiness, great. They're 2 sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
So, I don't know that, I think that there's something ethereal about when you say to people like happiness, like be happy today. I'm like, okay, you can be happy today, but you still need to have bifocals on, right? Like happy today, maybe some people, their best life is they maximize happiness every day. And for other people, their best life is they might minimize happiness on a given day, but maximize happiness over a cycle. Both are possible. It's not an either or. But if somebody says to me, pursue happiness every day, I'd be like, well, actually, by virtue of being a CEO, like every day is not happy. You deal with a lot of like messy problems that are very stressful, right? But over the course of your, of your career, you find fulfillment, and you look back and you're like, I wouldn't have it any other way. So is that happiness too?
Right.
So but I see both. Like my husband is a very different person from me. We're kind of very complementary, and I think my husband, in a good way, pursues happiness every day. That's a great way to be. Yeah. There are days I wake up and I wish I could pursue happiness every day, right? Like, so I'm saying the 2 sides of the same coin. So is his life better than mine or worse than mine? No, they're just different. He maximizes his happiness, I think, every day or every week, and I maximize mine over maybe 2 years, 5 years, or a month. It doesn't matter, right? We're both in pursuit of the same thing.
Yeah.
What about you? Do you pursue happiness every day, or do you have this arc and you're willing to take a lot of unhappiness every day to be?
I pursue growth and impact every day.
Yes, you pursue fulfillment leading to happiness, not happiness leading to fulfillment.
But I'm also I pursue delayed gratification as well. Yeah. Like I pursue pain so that I can stay healthy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like I do things that are uncomfortable consistently so that I live a happier, healthier life long term. Yes, as opposed to short term like happiness or relief or...
Oh yes, and by the way, like I would say my husband is like that. He's a former athlete, or professional athlete. So to your point, on the physical front and so on, he will pursue good health every day. And actually, I make poor choices every day. But we're probably both trying to optimize for delayed gratification in different ways.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I want to shift the conversation. There's a stat that I saw. Around 65% of businesses failed during the first 10 years. Mm-hmm. And you worked with a lot of multi-billion-dollar companies, as well as some failed startups.
Yes, both.
Why do you think most businesses fail, and what can we do to build stronger businesses?
I think a lot of businesses fail for 2 or 3 different reasons, but I'm going to outline the couple that are most important.
Okay.
And it comes back to what I believe about people too. First and foremost, in anything we execute as entrepreneurs, let's take the example of being an entrepreneur because it's totally related to running a startup. We tend to believe that it's all about us. Remember that worldview I just talked about? We think it's all about us.
Right.
But most times, when you look at businesses, there's like macro and micro. Businesses, like I would say, if you want to understand why you're failing or succeeding, you can say it all comes down to my execution. What could I be doing better, right? And that's true. You should go take the feedback on what you can be doing and optimizing. We're going to talk about in a moment. But first, I'm like, lift your head up. What's going on around you that's impacting your success or failure? So when you look at businesses that thrive, I'm always like, okay, look at the tailwinds that they're riding, or look at the tailwinds that they might be riding or the headwinds they're facing. So I'm like, I think the first reason that businesses might succeed or fail is they are overly attuned to their execution and maybe not as attuned to the macro tailwinds and headwinds. In the book, I give the story of my sister who ran an optometry practice. And for many years, it was going really well.
Yes.
by the way, much more than 10. Like probably ran that practice for 12, 15 years, always growing, right? Growing, and she had employees, felt fulfilled at work, all of those things, her own boss, all those things. And then it started to go into decline.
Why?
So, and it started in steady decline, and every year she was eating into more of her savings. And I said, well, Nikki, I was like, okay, so let's step back. So let's step back and understand why your business is in decline. By the way, she knows, she's very smart. She's like, well, I'm in a mall. This mall has less foot traffic. There are now 3 optometrists in this mall. So more competition. The mall itself has less foot traffic because more people are shopping online. Oh, and wait, there's also a lot of companies that are starting to sell you glasses online. So an optometrist makes their money, not just by doing eye exams, but the most lucrative part of the practice is, guess
selling
what?
Product.
Selling products.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you look at those macro trends. So Nikki's business is starting to decline, and I'm like, Nikki, like, let's look at your choices. She's like, well, this is all I know. This is what I know. Like, I am
doing this for 20 years. I've been
and it's
training
mine, and I
my
know it.
baby,
It's right.
yeah.
So let's look at this. Right. So a business that's doing well then turns into decline. So you could say, Nikki, run faster. Keep your hours up later.
Marketing
like
spend.
Spend more. Right. Get better inventory. Okay. Let's stop a moment. Your location is in decline. You have more competition. Like, this trend is not going anywhere, right? Like, and by the way, the mall charges you fixed rent and wants to increase the rent year on year.
Yeah.
Okay, so like at the macro level, is this scenario going to work? You can try and out-execute your way out of this mousetrap. Is it going to work? And so then we charted a course, and we laid out 5 new options, and ultimately my sister ended up taking one after 5 or 6 years and sold her practice and moved to a new location and worked for a growing franchise of optometry practices that bought her practice and that's closer to her home and, are able to compete because they have the dollars and capital to go figure out how they're going to drive people to their own location.
It's not all on her making all
It's not on her,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so that's a perfect example of when I say macro versus micro, you have to lift your head up and assess the tailwinds and headwinds of your macro situation.
Yes.
So the first flaw is many people think it's all about them. It's not all about them. Okay, that's piece 1. Now let's come to the part that is all about you, which is we sort of want to make one decision and stick with it. And I think this is sort of a big part of the thesis for why I wrote the book. We think it's one decision to success. We think it's one choice to success. And I'm like, okay, well, whether you want to or not, the conditions around you keep changing. You may want them to stay static, but they're not. And so what if I told you that for you to keep succeeding, you need to keep choosing? It's like actively keep choosing. You have to keep
new
choosing,
decisions.
Choosing new decisions, taking new risks,
Yes.
getting in tighter feedback loops, adjusting, right?
Always.
So, always. So obviously tech is very good at this, right? But we're not this good at this in small businesses or in our own careers. You say, how you want to just do something and set it, right?
Life doesn't
set
work
it
that
and
way.
forget it.
Life
Exactly.
doesn't work that way.
Right. So like businesses don't work that way. So like you want to set it and forget it. But as my old CTO at StubHub would say, like product market fit is elusive. You think that you do something and then you have it. But then something adjusts and then you need to adjust and then you need to keep adjusting. So like this is the way our lives unfold. This is the way businesses unfold. So if you said to me like, why do you, and I think Paul Graham at YC talks about this, like sometimes to make it, you have to survive. And surviving is about pivoting.
Constantly.
Right? Constantly. And so I think if you want to set it and forget it, I don't know if many businesses now that work that way, because every single business is being disrupted. And by the way, if they're not being disrupted by technology, even small businesses.
Being disrupted by the pandemic or
You're
politics or
you got
this,
it.
whatever.
Local politics.
Everything.
A competitor down the street, right? So you have to keep adjusting.
Some new innovation that comes out or some new
You got
technology.
it. So whether it's micro or macro, remember we said life lives in possibility. So you have to keep pursuing the next possibility, because at the minute you're like at stasis, whether you're a small business or whether you're a gigantic startup, with plenty of money, you have to keep adjusting. So first of all, I think people are not nearly heads down enough when it comes to adjusting.
They're
but
not
that
willing
in turn,
they're not willing to adjust.
Yeah,
enough?
not willing to adjust. It's like, as I said, they want to set it and forget it. And I think number 2, so you have to keep pivoting to keep product market fit. And then number 2, so I'm like, you have to be heads down, but heads down to pivoting.
Right.
And then you have to be heads up to like the environment around you and the stuff that's not all about you, and then find your responses. So I know that sounds like a very simplistic thing for like, why do some businesses, take 10 years to, just like, look, the board list is 5 years old. It's my own startup, right? It just raised seed funding. The board list is always adjusting. Like, I can't tell you what it'll be in 5 years.
It's not the same thing now as it was when it started.
It wasn't. And by the way, if we want to be there in 5 years, like, we're going to have to keep adjusting as we go. And like, there's going to be new entrants and new competition and new legislation. And like, And so sometimes I understand that that's like tiring, but that's the way the world works.
That's the way
right?
business will thrive. The only way it'll thrive.
The only way it'll thrive is if you're willing to keep adjusting. Now, the good news is, like, if it's a small business, that doesn't mean you have to go, like your adjustments might be micro adjustments, right? But it's like this.
You have to change your whole product line and everything.
Yeah, exactly, right? And maybe you're going to make 1,000 adjustments and one day you'll end up in an entirely new business. Or maybe you'll make 1,000 adjustments and your business will be just a better version of what it is today. I don't know the answer. But if you say to me, like, why do startups fail? And I know that's a long question, a long answer to your question. I'm sort of like, first of all, it's not all about you, heads up. And then the part that is about you is about adjusting and pivoting. So, like, heads down, keep pivoting. Keep it,
How do you learn to keep pivoting when, part of business success and growth and scale is like automating systems, having processes in place, having, procedures that are constantly we've got to constantly shift these processes and shift the,
I think
the software and change these things.
Yeah, I should have used a better word than pivoting. Let's call it iterating.
Yeah.
So, businesses are iterative cycles of focus. So that's sort of my point. So, like, let's say you're in your company and competition is like, is increasing. As I said, there's like 10 painting companies down the road that have just emerged, and you run a exterior paint company. I'm like, okay, this is when I shouldn't say pivoting. What I mean is like constantly iterating on the part that needs it, right? So you have to sequentially say like, okay, hold the rest of this part. I now need to go figure out like what my marketing strategy is. Okay, when that's done, like, there will be yet another thing to iterate on. So I think pivoting is probably has a higher connotation, like as if you're not focused. What I'm suggesting is like you have to serially iterate and focus on different, right? And it's like, it's going like full way around a circle and then maybe coming all the way back. Like, so that's what I mean more. Like, it's like iterating.
This is good stuff. I mean, I feel like a lot of people had to learn that lesson the hard way during the pandemic. Right. Because if you didn't pivot or iterate, then you're failing.
Yeah. The pandemic
it forced
was
you to fail if you weren't willing to evolve.
Right. Well, don't you think so? Again, just sort of like this is the whole reason this is a good time to have a conversation about risk taking and how to evolve and grow yourself, right? Because I feel like in the pandemic, people really learned a lot more about their risk taking ability when times were tough.
They either like held back or they went all in on something, right?
You got it, right. But either way, don't you believe that in the pandemic, people learned a lot more about their agility and resilience and ability to pivot fast than they learned when times were good?
Absolutely.
Right? So when we're trying to avoid harm, active harm, we often are actually more risk-taking than we are like in our daily safe lives. And you're like, what's that all about? This is a good time to ask that question.
Yeah.
Which is why I think that the pandemic should have given us all confidence that we're much more capable of response than we think you're. Agile response, right? And so your opportunity is, okay, if you know that about yourself, what holds you back when times are good? And it's often things like ego, right? Like fear of personal failure, right? And that's why I'm like, okay, believe in like what's possible today and try it. And if it's not, you iterate your way out of it.
Yes.
Like I sort of am a believer that you can, if this book's bad, I'm going to iterate my way out of it. If this podcast, if like people are like, oh my God, she's a crier, like this podcast gets a 2 rating, I'm going to iterate my way out of it, right? Yeah. So I just believe that people learned a lot more about their capacity to respond. And so it gives us all a lot more choice than we think we have.
Do you feel like you took bigger risks during the pandemic, or did you?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I took big risks and small risks. At work, as you know, I was running StubHub, and we had just sold the company at the time.
A month before you sold it, right?
Yeah, we sold it on February 13th, and on March 13th, our business.
Crazy.
Our business collapsed, like everybody in live events, and so. And it's really interesting because I was running StubHub. I'd been bought in to run StubHub by eBay, which was the parent company of StubHub. And I would say eBay was attracted to me as StubHub CEO because I had just come from being an entrepreneur. I'd been at Google early in my career and scaled. And then I'd been an entrepreneur for 7 years. And so I think eBay wanted that entrepreneurial energy back at StubHub because StubHub had been, at that point, was owned by almost 10 years by eBay. Wow. And its growth was slowing and costs were, maybe higher than they should be. Margin was declining. And so I think I was bought in to bring that entrepreneurial energy, right, and to help StubHub pivot. So, and find new services and all sorts of things. So I felt like I spent, and I loved the team we had at StubHub. They're just a great group of humans. But I still felt like I spent 1.9 months out of my 2 years of tenure trying to train people to be more agile. I'm like,
Really?
okay, guys, you have to make multiple moves, and we can come there next if you want. I have a thesis on what it takes for businesses to really succeed, and the research would say it doesn't take one move, it takes multiple moves for you to be an outperformer. So we'll talk about that. So I'm trying to train you to be agile. It's like, look, over here we need to cut costs. Over here we need to get international going. Over here we need to try new services. Over here we need to reinvest in the core, right? You're trying to create a portfolio strategy, but teaching people to be more agile, right? And so here we are, and for 9 months working at changing the culture and, getting people to take more risks at work and all those things. And we're making progress.
Leadership development. And
all of those things, right? And then what happens? The pandemic happens, and the entire company goes into crisis mode.
Really?
And within a month, we restructured the business. We changed policies overnight. We took risks to make sure we survived.
Right.
And we took them rapidly. And 100% of our employee base was on board, hands on deck, just figuring it out in real time. And it was like one of my proudest moments, those most stressful moments as a CEO, because people all learned about their agility. So like we made more decisions, right? And pivoted. Like think about it, running a company for EBITDA and more margin points of growth and revenue growth for like 99% of your tenure, and then all of a sudden you move to a cash flow business. Literally, do we have enough cash
to pay this month's salaries?
Expenses. Like literally. And by the way, we're no longer owned by eBay. We're owned by another private startup who's cash constrained themselves. Like, do we have enough money? Oh my God, customers are asking for hundreds of millions of dollars in refunds. Like, where is the money? I mean, like literally, you go to managing on cash. Like you go to manage daily, weekly, monthly cash for a company that hasn't been used to that for like the entirety of its last 10 to 15 years, right? So 10 years at least with under eBay. So anyway, long-winded way of saying I think that we learn more in crisis. I learned more, certainly as a CEO, was the most intense period I've ever been through.
What did you learn about yourself?
What did I learn about myself? Honestly, in the pandemic, I don't think that I learned that much about myself. I don't mean that in a bad way, on the business side. Remember, I've been a startup CEO and I've been through crises. I have been through crises. So what I learned about myself is, thank God, I have lived a life of, cyclicality and entrepreneurship that maybe makes me well positioned for this moment. It's not like in the time I was like, I'm well positioned. It's more like I felt stable and secure and capable.
Yeah.
I felt capable.
I felt the same thing during the pandemic.
Yeah. I felt nervous. Don't get me wrong. Like on edge.
Yeah.
On edge.
Scared a little bit, yeah.
But capable. Yeah. Scared, but capable. Responsible, but capable. Like, do you know what I mean? So I felt assured of myself in the moment, but I felt obviously a lot of anxiety for our team. So what I learned about myself in the pandemic, that I felt grateful that I'd had the set of experiences before. That in that moment of responsibility, I was like, I can do it. What I felt like I learned most is what I already knew about our people, which is you are capable. Okay, so what I learned in the pandemic is I felt like saying, I know you're capable.
Wow.
Look what you just did.
Wow.
So, right? So that was the gift of the pandemic. Helping other people understand that they are capable too. And being a leader in that moment, which is like, look what we just did. We were able to do this. You would never have guessed that you would see this situation, neither did I. You are capable. Okay. By the way, it's not that we handled it perfectly. It's not we didn't have pissed off customers, whatever, but we needed to deliver, and make sure the company survived, and we did. And that was 2,000 people. That wasn't me, right? That was 2,000 people coming together, cutting their own jobs. Like, think about this for a moment. People who are understand that they're going to have to make sacrifices to give up their own security. It was painful, but people understood they were capable. So I think that's what I learned. And then on the personal side, what did I learn through COVID? I learned the importance of all the things my husband was always telling me. He's like, why are you commuting, for God's sake? You give up hours a day. And I'm like, I have to. Simon, I have to. I have to be present for my employees. I have to commute. Like, the only jobs are in San Francisco. My husband.
Where are we living?
I live in Silicon Valley. So, keep in mind.
So like an hour commute? You mean like
an hour each way. So for 20 years, right, I've said to my family.
Man.
I have to do this. Right? And my husband's like, really? Do you have to? And so I would just say, what else did I learn? I was pretty schooled on all the things we think we have to do. That your family tells you, do you have to do this? So for all of us who are CEOs who make our families sacrifice a ton for our careers and our ambitions, I felt like I learned that, in fact, the commute has cost me a lot.
Really?
In terms of my, just in terms of my productivity, my time,
energy,
being home for dinner, all of those things. And then I felt like many people, the COVID learning for me was man, look at all that we miss of like our families and each other. And again, like this is not like some saintly view. I'm sure I'm going to be capable of many sins as like hybrid work comes back. But, just the joy of like seeing your kids every day, having them all home for a moment, all of those things. Like, I saw all those moments too. And I was like, wow, what have I missed? Wow. So, and of course, as I go back to being a CEO again, I'm inevitably going to screw it up. But I said to my family, I was like, can we just keep like 1 or 2 COVID rituals as everybody goes back to their thing? You know what I mean? The kids go back to practices. And so I, like everybody else, was less to make for it. Like maybe I can hang on to 1 or 2 of these things. I'm pretty sure I'm going to like screw it up on a bunch of other things because I just love work too much and I sacrifice a lot of my personal life to it. But hopefully we keep a few things, a few COVID practices.
I want to talk about wealth creation and wealth building.
Sure.
What do you think are the 3 most important steps to building wealth for an individual?
Ownership. Like literally equity ownership. Yeah. Like you look at the most wealthy people in the world, and if you want to be wealthy, you need to be an owner.
They have equity in something.
They have equity in something. You have equity in your small business. You're like my sister. You have equity in your practice, and you sell your patient files, to a bigger partnership. Or you're like me, and you have equity in a big company or small company, whether you started it or not. Equity ownership is the key to wealth creation. That's why people own their homes. Yeah. The biggest source of wealth for people, home ownership, right? Mm-hmm. You have to be an owner.
Okay, that's one.
So for sure, that's a big one. Number 2, this, everybody knows it, but we need to do it. Saving, just like saving early and compounding returns. Yeah. I think is the second.
A lot of people don't do that. I started doing that years ago.
Most people don't do it.
Even when I didn't have that much money, I was like, even $500 a year, $1,000. When I was broke,
I know, right?
It's something.
It's
amazing. I remember I started at like 27, maybe starting to like my IRA and then just other investments, and I was like, but I don't have that much to invest to save in. Yeah, I wasn't making that much, but now 11 years later, I'm like, oh, look what I've accumulated.
Well, more importantly, saving allows you to do what? Become an owner. Like,
right. You can buy something with it.
You got it. These are inherently related, right? Mm-hmm. So if you say, like, if you don't save, guess what? The day the equity ownership comes up to buy a piece of a home, or these days a piece of a home, or land,
or whatever,
or stock market, equity in the stock market,
art, whatever you want to,
If you don't have savings, how do you become an owner? It's impossible. So these 2 things are inherently related, right? So even if it's fractional ownership, which we all have opportunities for now. So I think in order to become an owner, you need to accumulate savings. Okay. So I think that's those are my 2. I don't have a third. Those are it. Those are the 2.
What about the mindset around wealth and creating more financial abundance? Yeah. How do we shift the narrative from thinking, money's bad, or I don't understand money, or I'm not educated on it, so that I'm not going to receive it? How do we change the mindset of the conversations we have around money? Sure. Because I feel like a lot of people don't talk about it enough.
Yeah, I know. People, and I don't know, there's no shame in wealth creation, right? But I think there are 2 things. First of all, financial literacy is so key. You know this. If you don't have financial literacy,
it's hard. Yeah,
it's hard, right? So, so I was lucky that I give my dad so much credit. My dad owned equities. Like he literally owned stocks. He would call his broker and buy them every day. So I saw stock ownership as a thing, right? And then I ended up becoming a financial analyst. So of course I got financially literate. But my point is, if you're not literate, getting literate is how you understand savings and ownership, what have you. So I think that literacy is sort of one way, and not to be afraid of these conversations.
What are 2 books you'd recommend to someone on becoming more financially literate?
So to be honest, I've never read a book in my life because I did it all on the job.
Yeah.
So I think I'm a poor person to answer that question. Just if you said have you read a book on financial literacy, I'd be like,
you had mentors.
I had mentors, and my first job was as a financial analyst. So I went to undergraduate business school, so I did my dad's taxes. Understand, I did his taxes.
You were 12 when you did that, right?
I started teaching us to do his ledgers, to literally write numbers in a ledger when we were 7 or 8. Doing his taxes was a family affair.
That's crazy.
No joke. So when I say I was grown financially literate, that's actually true. Mm-hmm. So I don't think I'm a good person to recommend a book. But you could probably have a client of yours who would give people the best recommendations. So I think literacy is one. Number 2, I think if we are a female in a relationship, we tend to think that there's some shame in asking the other, like your husband or, whatever. Whoever is the wealth storer, you have to your point, you have to ask.
Ask what questions?
Well, you have to ask, like, where are our bank accounts? What do we have? Like, if you just, it's not just a question of being literate, it's a question of being, like, informed and not just trusting your financial decisions to other people, right? So, like, some people, like, if they're not literate, they won't ask. I'd say the converse is true. Like, you can be literate and ask at the same time. So if somebody is managing your money, you better freaking know where it is. And part of getting literate is being comfortable with asking questions, like, and if you don't, so I think there's literacy and there's information, and they're very highly correlated. So I know people who their husbands or, manage all their money. I know people who give money to their broker and they don't know what their broker's investing in. I'm like, okay, so one is literacy, but one is like sheer information. So I see a lot of people who are like, this is an uncomfortable topic, so I'm just going to also outsource not just literacy, I'm just going to outsource information. Like somebody else has information on my financial well-being. That's a little crazy to me. But I see a lot of people who just don't want to have the conversation. More often women than men. This is why like platforms like Vest and others that like are driving women to manage their own wealth, I think is disproportionately important. So I think that's very key.
How can women change the mindset around earning, saving, investing, and becoming more having more ownership of their money mind?
Well, first of all, I think many women are.
Okay.
But I just think that platforms that do it, I think anything that gives you education without it being intimidating is like very critical. So I think that women are doing it more and more. But I think that platforms that can accelerate your knowledge or your management of your own money is key. The third thing you can do, as we talked about, take a little risk. Like if you're too afraid to manage all your money, take 10% of it and say, I'm going to manage this directly.
Right.
And then the third thing I say to people is, if you want to start creating wealth, invest in what you know. Okay, so people think that...
Don't invest in crypto if you don't understand it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just like literate about like how financial systems work. It's like literally invest in what you know.
Yeah.
So I've become an e-commerce investor over the last 10 years, and a pretty good one. But that's because I was an e-commerce CEO.
Right.
And so while I understand the business, and so I was practicing every day, I thought like, God, like I know enough about these numbers to know where our numbers look good or bad, but that gives me pattern recognition in becoming an angel investor. So as opposed to like, yes, I had diversification of wealth across different sectors or diversification of angel investments across different sectors of e-commerce, but literally I doubled down on e-commerce because I understood that business.
Right.
When I was an analyst, I was at Merrill Lynch and early in my career, and I worked on the financial services industry, the savings and loan industry, which is the most, I learned about savings and loans, balance sheet, and income statements. And the first stocks I ever bought were in the savings and loan industry because I was like, I understand what good looks like. So I think if you want to create wealth, you need to understand what you're investing in.
Yeah.
Let's say you're going to buy real estate. Okay, well, you need to understand the neighborhood. You need to understand the comps. You can't just fall in love with a house and say like, is this a good investment?
It looks good. I'm just going to buy,
Yeah. But I mean this like one and done, somebody shows you something,
Right.
So I think there's generally literate, asking about your own money and understanding like where it is, who's managing it, like what's there. If you're shy about I think that's, and then I think number 3, very specifically literate when you want to invest in something.
Yeah. If someone feels like a failure, like they have these failure conversations with themselves, they feel like they have a lot of negative thoughts. How can we overcome these negative thoughts and help us get out of a rut if we kind of feel like we're always stuck in that failure mindset?
Yeah, look, I think that when people are looking at failure, one of the reasons I think failure is so daunting for people is because they think that a choice is binary. So I think there are 2 things that you need to do if you want to get out of failure mindset. First of all, you have to get out of this idea that you have one shot at glory. Okay, so we fear failure because we think whatever decision we make is what Jeff Bezos calls a one-way door. I go through this door, there's no coming back.
It's going to define me forever.
It's going to define me forever. Like, right? When Jeff Bezos, in the shareholder letter to Amazon shareholders, very clearly said, most of the decisions we make at Amazon are 2-way doors. You go through, it doesn't work out, you come back, right? So I think that most people have the perception that failure is the result of a binary choice. You make one choice, it fails or succeeds. Now, if you believe, like I believe, that actually between you and a reward is probably not one decision, but 30, 40, 100. Should you really overweight the importance of the first decision? I would say you should overweight your ability to keep choosing. If you can keep choosing, you will find a path. You may not end up where you started, but where you wanted when you started, but there will be a path. But that, like, you have to dismiss this myth that failure is a bimodal, binary, one-way door. It isn't. It's just the first choice in a series of choices you will inevitably have to make.
Yeah.
So first of all, stop thinking about failure as like a one-choice circumstance. It's just not. Then number two, and I will say this, supposing the decision you're contemplating is in fact bigger, and it is a one-way door. I make it up. You mortgage your house,
right.
You're starting a company, like, you know, you can't take back the mortgage, you quit your day job, you go to zero salary, and you mortgage your house. Okay, we could agree that's a big risk. In that mode, I always say to people, like, okay, well, if it's a big risk, then as opposed to planning for all the upside that's going to happen on the other side, plan for the failure mode. Plan for the failure mode in order to get yourself to act. And people are like, what do you mean? I'm like, okay, if something's really, you know, a big and scary risk, I want you to tell me the 5 choices you'd make after the choice. Tell me. Like, what are they? Like, what are the 2? What are the 3? What are the 4?
If it fails,
play through the failure. Tell me the 5 choices. And then I bet that you will find 2, 3, 4 recovery paths. But actively think about that now. Park all of your imagining of the upside. Okay, that's great to get what I call your FOMO going. You'll get really excited. Fear of missing out is like, you know, you want to act, you visualize the positive. But when you're trying to overcome failure, I'm like, visualize a failure, work it through, understand all your contingencies, and then you're probably far more likely to get into action, because what you've done is reduce your fear of failure.
Yes.
Because you're actively imagining the choices after the choice when it fails.
That's interesting you say that, because I was interviewing a UFC fighter, George St. Pierre, and it was one of the greatest of all time. And he was talking, I think it was him or another UFC fighter that I heard, I can't remember which one it was, but talking about how they train to be in the most uncomfortable situations.
Yes.
Like, I'm on my back, my arm is behind my back, I've got a hand here, and a guy's just punching me in the face. How do I get out of this?
Yes, that's exactly
right.
How
do I get out of it? How do I stay calm? How do I not, like, pass out? How do I, you know, if I'm in the worst position possible, like every bad position I train for, and I train to get out of it.
Yeah.
So that when it does happen,
yes,
I'm like, this sucks and it's uncomfortable, but I know I can get out of it.
Yeah.
And if I can just get back on my feet and stand up again, then I can take the next step.
Right, exactly. And then, and I think for people who are like, I fail, let's say you pick a new job and you left your old job and you cut your ties and it fails. I'm like, okay, what then? So play through, okay.
You lose your relationship, you lose your kid, everything you lose,
Yeah, then you're like, okay, well then what would you do?
Yeah.
Because I think that on small failures, it's enough to know that if you act once, you still have 10 more choices.
Yes.
On something that is like truly a one-way door, there are very few decisions that truly you can't come back from. And those things, you're like, okay, then what are my contingencies?
Right.
What do I do? So I believe that like this risk-taking equation guides all of us, which is fear of missing out is warring with fear of failure. Whichever one is, like, you know, fear of missing out is greater than fear of failure, you'll take action. If fear of failure is greater than fear of missing out, you won't. But most people only want to work one side of that equation, which is think about the positive.
Right.
And I'm like,
no, you got to think about both.
Yeah, it's.
One of my coaches, Chris Lee, years ago, probably like 7 years ago, I had been training for years already to overcome the fear of public speaking.
Really?
And I'd been speaking for, I don't know, at this point, 10 years professionally, and I'd made good money on stages and spoken in front of 20,000 people. And I remember saying to him, I was like, gosh, I don't know why, but I still feel like kind of scared and nervous.
Yes.
Like the day before I go on. And I don't know why. And I remember calling him like hours before, and I go, I don't know why I'm still nervous and a little afraid. And he said, because one of the things is you're afraid of how you're going to look. You're afraid of like being embarrassed or not like saying the right thing or messing up. You're still afraid of that as opposed to being of service to the audience and knowing you're going to mess. It's not going to be perfect. And he put me through an exercise like, like a what if or what happens next exercise. Just go, okay, what if you forget your words? What if you forget that story? Then what?
Then what?
Then what? And you just go, then what?
I call that the choice after the choice. Then what?
Well, then I'll be like embarrassed. Well, then what? Well, then what's the worst could happen? I don't know. Then I just walk off stage and I forget the whole thing. And then what? And then what? He's like, well, everyone laughs at me. Okay, and then what? And then I don't want to come out for a week because I'm so embarrassed. And then what? And it's like eventually you're like, okay, I'm down here and I'll pick myself back up and I'll be okay and I'll start again.
Yeah,
So-
I think that that's sort of the point. Like the then what, then what, then what. We sort of have trained ourselves to think that it has to be, you know, that it, like I said, it's bimodal. I'm like, it's not bimodal. It's like what will happen is you'll discover there are 5 choices after choice. So think those through now.
Yes.
Because in there is comfort.
It's so good. It's so good. What is the thing that you're most proud of most people don't know about you?
What I'm most proud of career-wise, and then I think what I'm most proud of people know. What I'm most proud of career-wise is I have had a career of working with exceptionally talented people where I feel like I got to be part of accelerating their journey. That is what I'm most proud of. Like, I'll look back on my life and say, regardless of the companies or what, I just look, I always say to people, do you know how amazing it is to work with tribes of great people who are by and large great human beings as well? And then be like, oh yeah, I will look at my journey and be like, I got to intersect with these amazing people, and maybe for a few of them, or hopefully a meaningful number of them, I was an accelerant. So that's what I'm most proud of, kind of business-wise. What am I most proud of that people wouldn't know about me? Maybe that I think I wake up every day both fully empowered and also pretty clear that I'm like pretty far from the center of the universe. Like I'm proud of the fact that I think that most people would think that I wake up thinking I sort of must rule the roost. And most days I'm like, no, I wake up pretty empowered, but I'm really grounded and clear that, life is a blessing. I'm here for a reason. I'm living my impact. The world is a much, much bigger place than just me. Yet I feel very stable within it. Like I don't feel like nothing's going to shake me.
Yeah, that's good.
Because I have a sense for why I'm here and what I'm meant to do without thinking that it's all about me.
Right.
So I'm proud of that.
That's cool.
I'm proud of that.
That's great.
I'm good with it.
That's great. The book is about risks, and you say most things won't shake you, but when people take big risks, sometimes it shakes them a lot. What's the biggest myths around risk-taking that we tell ourselves?
Yeah. And by the way, of course, if you read the book, you'll know that many risks I took shook me, which is the whole reason for writing the book. Because I'm like, okay, don't let it shake you. This is what happened to me. So I can't say I've never been shaken by risk. But I think I keep coming back to that singular point. Like, I know it sounds so simple, but it is the point of the entire freaking book. The book is about how, but the point of the book is about, let go of this myth of the single choice. Stop believing that outcomes are binary, that risk and reward is a singular linear game. Like, hey, I take a big risk, I get a big reward, or I have an epic fail. Like, it's just not like that.
Yeah, it's either I win big or I lose it all.
Exactly. That is this bimodal issue. I think that is the biggest myth around risk-taking, and it's the whole reason I wrote the book. I'm like, you have to keep choosing. Stop overweighting the first choice. If you are willing to keep choosing, there are, a thousand choices between you and success. And I cannot promise you that the success you'll get at the end is the one you originally thought. It may or may not be. But I can tell you that if you keep aiming for impact in every single choice, cumulatively, you will have an outsized career and you will have an outsized life. Cumulatively.
Yeah.
But if you want to measure yourself on every single choice, I can tell you the people I know who succeed greatly are pretty freaking imperfect. They're master risk takers, as measured by small and big acts of possibility, right? As opposed to this one big act of possibility for which they're famous. Like, no, they roll by becoming a master at the process of risk taking and constantly choosing. They're just, right? They're very skilled at continuing to choose.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you believe that it's harder to go from 0 to 10 million? Like in startup, like here's my idea, I'm launching the business, zero revenue coming into 10 million for the business, or taking over a company from 100 million and taking it to $1 billion? Which one is harder and why?
Interestingly, I think 0 to 10 is exceptionally
hard, right?
It's hard, my friend, because as we talked about, you're trying to find essential product market fit. And so I think it's just really hard. And when you have momentum, everybody wants to work with you, right? So things unlock fast. Like, creating momentum is really frigging hard. It takes so much energy. A venture capitalist who was on my board once described and I think he said it the best. I'm not going to do it justice. He said, when you're in a startup, you have your hand on this gigantic wheel and you're trying to turn it once, one big wheel to get momentum, right?
Oh my gosh.
One revolution of the wheel takes so much energy, right? And and then when you have a bigger company and you have product market fit, it's one revolution. First of all, you can get through one revolution very quickly, and just it creates, and you have many, many more turns, each of which are producing more energy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like trying to get that first revolution to create any momentum. Because if you can't even get the wheel to turn once,
I know.
There's no momentum or energy,
Nothing.
net energy output. But once you have energy in a system, then turning the wheel is easier. And every time you turn the wheel, more energy spits out, right? So,
I think Jim Collins in Good to Great, I think calls that like the flywheel. It's like just like keep the flywheel going. Like,
that's one of my favorite books. So one of your favorite books? I love that book. It's a classic.
It's very like heady for me, but yeah, like.
Oh, really? It's very heady for you? Well, I'll tell you the part of it, just coming back to our previous conversation.
It's a great book though, but
it's a great business book.
Yeah,
I understand that it's a little very analytical for you. But come back to, there's a point he makes in that book, another point which I should have brought up, but I didn't. We were chatting about the choice after the choice, and the then what, and the then what, and the then what. You probably remember from the book his story about Jim Stockdale and the Vietnam War veteran who talked about who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam and ended up being, do you remember this story from the book?
Go ahead.
He basically, Jim Stockdale, I think it's Stockdale, was a decorated Vietnam veteran, prisoner of war, who helped send Morse codes out and get his whole, cohort rescued when the war, before the war ended. But he made the point that the people who were pure optimists were the first to get really depressed in camp because they thought they were being rescued tomorrow.
Oh,
and then the pure pessimists,
someone's coming
every day. And then when they didn't come, they didn't know how to handle that failure. Right. So they got very depressed. And then there were other people who were like, nobody's ever coming. And they were also depressed. But he said the people who did best in the POW camp were really like realistic optimists. They understood that it was unlikely that somebody was coming next day, but they had faith that somebody was coming. Right? And so your job was to survive every day until somebody came.
Oh my gosh.
I love that mentality. I'm like, yes, you can be paranoid every day about what it takes to run your business and iterate and pivot and what have you, while having faith that if you go through this process and keep doing it, you will survive and you will thrive. Right? So that's what I mean about being bimodal. You can be paranoid every day and be like, I have to iterate and I have to pivot, while still being fundamentally an optimist over the long term. But it's that ability to pivot that actually makes you the optimist, right? It's not like you have to go into it being like, everything's going to be perfect. Everything's going to be perfect or everything's going to be terrible. I'm like, no. You need to be a long-term optimist and a short-term, realist.
Mm-hmm. What's a question you wish more people asked you they don't ask?
I think most people ask me, Sukhinder, what would you do? Let's say we're in a Sukhinder, what would you do? And I think most people should ask me, what do you think I should do given who I am? Right? Everybody comes to a leader and they want the answer. And I think I would love more people to say to me, okay, it's not about what I would do. It's about, here's who I am. Here's my goal set. Here's my vision. What do you, given this.
Based on that, here's what is the
what's
best
your
solution.
insight?
Yeah.
Because I think, it's not about me giving somebody an answer, right? It's about, I want to know, who are you? And what do you think the answer is? What's your thesis to which I can respond and try and give you some insight that fits with who you are and what you want and what you believe, where you have conviction? So mostly I think that people should ask me that question stuff, what would you do? It's not about what I would do, it's about what would you do?
When I call you, I'll make sure to ask that question.
You'd be like, Sukhinder, here's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Here's what do you think?
Here's my unique gifts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here's my thesis. What do you think I should do given that information? I'd be like, oh, okay, well, this is what I would reflect to you.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, the problem is if you ask me, what should I do? I'm going to give you a straight up answer, and then you're going to think that that's what you should do. And, that's not always the right answer, right?
Maybe it is, but it's...
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But, it's the wrong question.
And then if you're taking action based on what someone else would choose to do, it might ruin the whole thing, or it might not go in the right direction.
This is the thing. I think we go through the world asking people who know us, what would you do? And it might be here's my reflections.
That's interesting.
What do you know about me? What do you think I should do given my own awareness? And what do you think? What am I missing about, in this equation about who I am in this situation? And those people probably have a better reflection for you based on who you are and your unique gifts, right, and capabilities and capacity. But you have to show some self-awareness first.
You got to be self-aware. Excited about your book, Choose Possibility, Take Risks and Thrive even when you fail. And I think a lot of people, it's hard for people to have this mindset of failing. But I've always been told that failure is just feedback as an athlete. It's I failed every day in practice and games. It's you never made 100% of your shots. You never caught the ball 100% of the time. And it's okay, that's information. How do I use that to become better? And not get down on myself, but to improve myself. And so failure has always been a part of my life because it teaches me something.
Right.
So take risks and thrive even when you fail. But I think that a lot of people are just afraid to take the risk because they don't want to fail. They don't want to have that, even a micro failure. It's
Yeah, and I don't think they think of, look, I think there's a couple things are going on. First of all, if you're an athlete, or you're, let's say, in a startup or what have you, you're used to this idea that every iteration is feedback, right? In a feedback loop. You're also used to probabilities. You know that in baseball, a 300 batting average is actually amazing,
Yes.
right? Whereas in the NBA, it might be, I don't know, maybe the top shooters are 76% or whatever. I mean, it depends, like what from the
Position,
field or what
yeah,
have you, position, right? Or you might know that if you're a trader or a hedge fund manager, but you know that it's a game of probabilities.
Yeah.
So why do we tell ourselves it's like one shot? Like, why do we think a winning season is like one shot, and then we put all of the weight on that choice? I think that is actually like the key for all of us. It's that risk taking is a muscle. It can be developed. The book is more about the how than the what, but it's both. It's like, yes, this is the principle, but I think when people say like have a growth mindset, I think people need tactics. They need a structure. They need tools. So hopefully the book gives you some of that. But yeah, it's always amazing to me. I'm like, we don't think in probabilities of our own life, right? We think that every single choice is the one that makes or breaks us.
Right. That's not true.
That's not true. Isn't it? It should be freeing for people to know there are many shots on goal.
Absolutely. Many shots on goal. Yeah, you've got a lot of different like equations in here and different examples
Frameworks.
here. So yeah, it's really cool.
I know maybe it's a little too heady for you.
No, it's all right. I'm always impressed with people who can do like frameworks and equations and formulas and map it out, because I never know how to explain it and position it that way. I'm always just like, well, this is how I do it. I don't know how to do it. But like when someone can do this, I really appreciate it. Even like the self-awareness sandwich, it's like the framework. It's okay. I would just try to like explain it in my mind. Well, this is how I feel, but you like put it into like a diagram. It's like, okay, that makes more sense. So I'm always appreciative of this. People should get the book. It's called Choose Possibility, Take Risks and Thrive, Even When You Fail. Sukhinder, I want to acknowledge you for a moment. I've got a couple final questions for you.
Sure.
But I want to acknowledge you, Sukhinder, for your vulnerability and your unique gifts. It's really been a pleasure to connect with you and to hear your stories and hear your connection to your gifts, the lessons from your father, the lessons from your experience as an executive at a high level, being a female executive and founder, the mindset around wealth, which I think a lot of people are afraid of. So I acknowledge you for opening up, for sharing, for being real. And I think we were able to create something inspiring today. So I really acknowledge you for your gift, and hopefully we can stay connected and I can help in any way possible. This is a question I ask everyone towards the end called the 3 truths. So I'd like you to imagine a hypothetical scenario. It's your last day on earth many years away.
Yep.
You live as long as you want, but eventually you gotta go to the next place.
You gotta go. Yeah, we talked about this. We're all gonna go. Yeah.
And for whatever reason, you've accomplished all your greatest dreams. Everything you want to accomplish has happened, personally, professionally, everything. But you've got to take your work with you.
Yeah.
The book, this message, all your conversations got to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Whether with you or not here on this earth. So no one has access to your information anymore.
Okay.
But you have a piece of paper and a pen, and you get to write down the 3 biggest lessons you've learned from your life that you would leave behind. And this is all we would have to remember you by. I call it the 3 truths.
Yep.
What would you say are yours?
Number 1, possibility lives in acts big and small, for sure. So, and I always say to people, you don't know if you don't try, right? So that is like just embodied. I think that like just remember possibilities in acts big and small. So like get started now. You'll never know if you don't try. I think that's 1. I think number 2, I'd say we're all here. We're all here to maximize our gifts and have impact. So discover yours. And I'd say number 3, and maybe this is unique to me given how I was raised, I was like, put it in perspective. It'll all be okay. We're all here. We're all here as part of something much bigger. You're loved, you're seen. Regardless of what happens, you will be okay.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Those are good truths. I'm curious, not to get too emotional here, but what do you think your father would say if he saw you now, of everything you've created in the last couple of decades?
First of all, I think he would say, remember that like all that you've been given is like a gift. Like just remember that. Remember where it comes from. Like, of course he would acknowledge it and acknowledge my, things I've achieved, but mostly I think he would acknowledge the universe, and he would be like, I think he would just say, feel grateful and understand where it all comes from.
Yeah.
So, of course, he would make me feel great, but he would also remind me, which I'm very clear on. Like I feel just grateful for for everything I've been given.
Right. Yeah. Gratitude is key for sure. Final question before I ask, I want to make sure everyone gets the book, Choose Possibility. Where can they go? Sukhinder Singh on Twitter. You're not on Instagram. I try to look for you. You're not there,
Oh,
are you?
I hide on Instagram.
Okay,
you know
cool.
what? It's just another. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm most present on
Twitter.
LinkedIn and Twitter.
Okay.
I do have an Instagram account. I never post. I just follow because it's just another place to be responsible, right? And like in a world where like that's where I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like one more thing to like take care of, and my life is so full right now.
I know. So Twitter and LinkedIn. Okay. ChoosePossibility.com. We can get information there. Is there a personal website for you as well, or is that?
My personal website is a book website. I don't have a website, but the best and most active place to find me is LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's where you can just find me at Sukhinder Singh. You can find me at you can actually on LinkedIn might be at Sukhinder Singh Cassidy.
Okay.
I guarantee if you put my name in the LinkedIn, you're going to come up with my handle.
Right away, yes.
And you can follow me there. You can certainly follow me on Twitter. Most importantly, you can buy the book wherever you want to buy books.
Awesome.
I mean, wherever you buy them, there's an audiobook, Amazon, all the usual places.
Inspiring stories, inspiring frameworks, lessons. I love it all. Final question is, what's your definition of greatness?
It's what we talked about earlier. I think it's people who not only create impact in their own lives, but they create impact and possibility for others. Powerful, my friend.
There you go.
If you want to be great, stop just generating possibility for yourself, or stop thinking of it as like, I have more possibility, you have less. If you have possibility, your opportunity is to generate it for other people, right? So that's greatness.
Sukhinder, thank you so much. Appreciate you very much. Appreciate it. Amazing. Let me know some of your biggest takeaways in the comments below, and make sure to share this with someone you think needs to hear it, and stick around for more inspiring content coming up right now. Now, did you know it was going to do pretty well based on like previous chefs that you had talked to who had done it?
No, because up until that point, Chef's Table was about typically fine dining chefs, and you're in their beautiful restaurants and you're in their beautiful kitchens.
You didn't have a restaurant.
We don't have a restaurant, and our kitchens are, our New York City kitchen, for example, is 11,000 square feet of space. And so I'm thinking, like, we don't use tweezers. We mix cookies in mixers that are big enough for you to take a bubble bath in, right? And so when they first even approached us, I was like, I think maybe you read the wrong article. Or I think perhaps you have the wrong impression, because you're not gonna get the story that you typically tell. One, the spirit of what we do is very, very democratic we make cookies that are accessible in an ideal world to anyone and everyone, right? It's a $2 cookie, it's a $3 cookie. You don't have to make a reservation. It does take a team to put together, but we're doing it in this really big, large, almost Willy Wonka type of factory. Right. And the spirit of these things, it's so different. It's so different. Our stores are open from 7 or 8 a.m. until midnight or 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. It's so different. And they said, no, we know exactly what it is that this episode will be. And we're into taking the risk.
Wow.
We're into taking the chance. And I think that acknowledgement for me was great. They're going to stretch. And so committing to this means meeting them at that stretch.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it came out when? Mid last year?
Yeah, middle of last year.
And what happened afterwards, like the next 6 months?
Well, I had no concept of, it's kind of interesting. You live in your own world, you live in your own head. I do what I do for me, I do what I do for my team, I do what I do because it's what makes sense in my head. I have no clue whether or not it's gonna, I don't know. I'm sure it'll resonate with some people, maybe not others. I didn't anticipate that it would sort of like blow up our universe in the most beautiful ways. And I mean that it affected people in ways that had nothing to do with food. Like, food was really the conduit more so than it was the focal point. I think you get to it because food's interesting and everyone wants to watch like a gooey cookie.
Right, yeah.
In like high res on a screen.
So
everyone wants that. But it was really interesting that our story became almost a metaphor for people that are passionate about life, that are trying to figure out what that means, what it can mean, what it should mean, what it takes to chase down a calling. And that it ended up acting as just like a connectivity, connective tissue, like an open hand, like, hey, do you need a friend, or do you need a pal, or do you need someone that gets what you're going through? And I think also became this real, like, became a thing that people went back to be encouraged to, like, we're all just regular, normal people.
Yeah.
There's nothing special in me that's not in you or you or you. It's just about, like, how deep you're willing to dig and what you're willing to do to get to what it takes. And P.S., like, nothing happens overnight.
Right.
Any, like,
this
overnight
didn't happen
successes. I didn't just wake up one day and
Start making cookies.
Yeah. And I think just kind of, like, ripping back, or bringing down all of the barriers and boundaries that people put up in their heads through a really honest, simple story of, like, we make cookies and cakes and pies and ice cream. We do it on our own terms. And it took a long time to get to the point to even have access to do that. And then once we did it, it took us another 10 years to get to where we are to today. And just being as honest as possible about that somehow resonated. Like, in that, like, mom always said, honesty is the best policy. It really is.
So for those who haven't seen the special and don't know what we're talking about, you had been a chef at, like, 5-star restaurants for many years, right? And can you tell the story in a brief amount of, like, what you were doing at the last restaurant and how Milk Bar started?
Came to me.
Yeah.
So I moved to New York to become a pastry chef. I went to culinary school because I thought loving to make dessert in a professional capacity meant being at the top of your game, and being at the top of your game was being in the most expensive fine dining establishment. And I worked my way up. And what I realized in doing that was I loved that pursuit of that craft. But when I took a look at myself in the mirror, I was like, but I really want to go home and make cookies at the end of the day.
Really?
Because I love feeding people. And my version of loving to feed people isn't in the fanciest environment.
Like a little thing with the sauces
which is
everywhere.
Gorgeous and amazing, and I obviously have so much respect for it. It just wasn't what was in me. And so the last restaurant I was at, I was doing that while also trying to figure out what my next step was, because I knew I couldn't do that anymore and be true to myself.
So you weren't finding fulfillment in the work you were doing necessarily.
I was finding fulfillment in the pursuit of a craft, but I wasn't finding fulfillment in, like, the truth of where I needed to be as a pastry chef, as a top dog. Like, I was resonating with the part of the creation, but not the entirety of the creation.
And you were making great money.
Well, no, great money does not really exist when you work in a kitchen. You work really long hours. You don't make a lot of money. It is a true labor of love.
But you were working at the best places.
I was working at the best places.
So you had credibility.
Credibility.
People looked up to you and respected you. You were
sure.
like the master of your craft.
For sure.
Got it.
But I was like, but what's it for? Because I still want to come in early and make
Cookies.
crazy brownies or cookies for everyone that works in the kitchen. And then I'll go and do my job. My day job, which inevitably when you work in a restaurant is typically a night job, I was getting to a place that I purposefully didn't want when I decided to work into a kitchen. I was like, I don't want a 9-to-5 job. I don't want to be a grown-up. I don't want to fall into a routine. And on some level, that was what that job was. So I needed to get out and figure out what my next step was. And my chef at that restaurant introduced me to Dave Chang, who was democratizing savory food. He had a very similar path. He was in fine dining restaurants and then was like, this doesn't make sense to me. And so he opened this, like, hilariously confusing ramen shop and was just like, I'm just gonna cook whatever I want that's delicious, and I'm just gonna open the doors, and if you come in and get a stool, you can eat for $7 or $8 or $9 or $10. And it became a magnet for people that would make a reservation at this fine dining restaurant, and for someone that lived around the block that was like, I'm here for good food. And that made sense to me on so many levels. I saw what he was doing through savory food, and I thought, I know what I wanted. Like, there's a path forward.
Right.
So I started working for him at Momofuku and helping him run operations. I would bake cookies at night and bring them in. And he knew I had a pastry background. And so one day he was like, this is, like, pretty much ridiculous. It's clear what you need to be doing. Like, go and do it.
Wow.
And gave me that push to open Milk Bar.
So you were working with him doing operations. You weren't actually cooking. Or doing pastry.
Like there were no desserts on his menu. It was like wham bam. You like saddle up to this noodle bar and you go, I'll have some roasted Brussels sprouts with kimchi puree and smoky bacon, which is something that exists now but didn't exist 12, 13 years ago. And it was kind of like a bunch of cowboys, right? Like
Sure.
there's a few dudes running the kitchen and I knew how to hold my own and all of that. But the thought of dessert at that point was like, what do you even make for dessert? Because it's like a ramen bar, but there's kind of pseudo-Japanese food, but also not at all. Became a melting pot for food, but also you need to get people in and out. If you're only charging them a few bucks, you got to get them in and out because you don't want them to sit and eat dessert. Like
so did you start serving dessert there for customers?
I did over time. I started like working backwards and going, all right, well, like what would be, I came up with soft serve ice cream. Like, great, people, you don't want people to sit in their chairs for a long time. You
Take
wanna
something to go. Yeah.
give them something that is going to be a beautiful liquid puddle if they don't eat it quickly, right?
Right.
And beyond that, I was like, it's this tiny little space. There's no room in the kitchen for a pastry team. So how do you reverse engineer that? And I was like, well, I can make these big, flavorful, delicious milks, if you will, ice cream bases. Put them in a machine, and I'm very big into nostalgia. And I was like, everyone loves soft serve ice cream. Everyone has that attachment.
But it was different than just soft serve. It had like cereal milk, right?
Yeah,
Something crazy.
They were all different,
Amazing.
kind of crazy flavors, because I was also like, I don't want to make vanilla ice cream. Everyone makes vanilla ice cream. Like, I'm not here to be the second, the third, the fourth of anyone else. I'm here to be the first me.
Wow.
And so, what does that mean through soft serve ice cream? And that was where I started to like put the pieces together of my own voice through food and my perspective on it. And I was ready when Dave was like, this is ridiculous. Like, just go and do it. Just go and do what we both know you want to do and you need to do. And I have your back. And he kind of just me out the door.
So he said,
literally right next door.
Right next door. He said, hey, we got a space here. I'll help you
Yeah.
launch this. Did he support
I
you?
was running operations, so I was like, dude, there's this spot next door. It's coming up. We need to be careful, right? Like, a competitor could come in, or this, or that, or the other. The landlord could make trouble for us, whatever it was. And it became clear very quickly that I would take over that spot because it was best for the Momofuku side of the business. And it checked the box of like, you'll still be around, we'll still be together, like we'll still have each other's backs, but you'll go and do this thing.
So next door, so you open it next door. What happens in the first few months?
We opened the door on November 15th of 2008, and there was a line out the door immediately, to the point that I have so many things I'm thankful for. One of the things was that I did not have enough time to worry about any of the things that I worry about now. There was no point in me that I was like, what if no one comes? I worry about that every day when we just opened our 17th store. And I'm like, what if no one comes? Or what if only 5 people, right? Like, what if no one comes? What if no one cares? What if people don't get what a compost cookie is? What if calling something that has, pretzels and potato chips and chocolate chips and coffee and all of these like random in your cupboard things? What if people are like, that's such a weird name? Or what if people are like, the milk that tastes like what's left in your bowl after you eat all the cereal out of it? Like, okay, I guess. I didn't have time to worry about any of that. And so when we opened the doors, we really did open in our truest, like most honest form of ourselves, because we just had this vision, and in a beautiful and terrible way, we hadn't gut checked it. It was just guttural. Like, there was no like, is that?
You didn't have a test group of people be like, tell me your opinion on this flavor. What you think of this?
And I was like, we're going to open at 8 a.m. and we'll open until 2 a.m. And there was no point of me that was like, girlfriend, that means that you are going to need to be at work from like 5 o'clock in the morning until like when you're done cleaning up 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, how is that going to work? Or we were a team of, I think, 4 or 5, where it was like, maybe you're going to need a few more people if you're going to do that 7 days a week. And so the doors opened. There was a line out the door from the very beginning. and we figured it out. I mean, we took off sprinting and we started climbing, and every day we figured it out, for good and for bad. We made so many mistakes. And the beauty of the mistakes were that we didn't have the opportunity for the mistakes to sit around. So we'd make a mistake and learn, and make a mistake and fix it real quick. I mean, I remember that morning of opening day, it was probably like 6 a.m. and it's like, okay, we're 2 hours from opening, and we're looking around, and I'm like, oh my God, we don't have a menu. Like, I knew what we were serving, and it was all loaded into the point of sale system, and we had paper menus, but I was like, you walk in and you can't actually see a physical menu. So we took the legs off of a stainless steel prep table. We're looking around like, what are we gonna do? Took the legs off of this stainless steel prep table, grabbed a dry erase marker, and I have terrible handwriting at best, and I was just like, keep baking, like, you know, just trying to like direct, like, keep baking. We were just like, we didn't know what to expect, but I think in a beautiful way it resonated with people, because I think when you buy a cookie, it's something that's so human. If you have ever had a cookie or a cake or a pie, you've probably had it from someone that's in your family that cares about you, that like in a love language way, making dessert is the ultimate love language. And I think you were just getting this honest team of people that were just like, they cared so much about what they did, and were just figuring it out. So it required a lot of patience from our customers, but you also got the most delicious, baked, mixed by hand, delivered with so much care thing. And people just came back.
Just serving love all day.
You know?
Love and hugs.
Love and
I love
hugs,
it.
right?
Oh my gosh. Every time I go to New York, there's always a line.
It's crazy.
When I go, I used to live off Prince and Mulberry, and there's a spot right there.
Yeah, there's
off
one
Mott.
on Mott, you're right.
And so whenever I go back to New York, I always try to go in my old neighborhood and see what's new. And I saw the Milk Bar, and I was like, man, there's a line.
That one is one of my...
It's so tiny. It's just like a little cupboard.
So one of the reasons there's a line is because the reality of doing business in New York City for a New York City stores is like, rent is expensive. You got to sell a lot of cookies to pay the rent. And I mean, you're open 7 days a week, 365 or 363, 362. But for me, I really think about our stores in New York, and I think in New York, you're there to be a person in the world. Your apartment is small. You're not really cooking at home, really. Yeah. Maybe on a special occasion, but you go home to sleep. You do everything else to be out in the world. And so that store for me was really special, because it's just a window on the street. It was like, we can try and jam people in, or that neighborhood is like that sort of like Nolita Soho neighborhood is the neighborhood where you go to explore.
So sweet.
And so it felt more like we have to be a part of the street, of this street of New York City.
That's cool.
And so you just grab it and you go on your way.
That's amazing. So the first store, you were making the cookies and cakes in the store.
Yeah.
But now you have this huge warehouse where you have bathtubs of truffle ball butter or whatever it is you have in there that you're mixing all day from the Netflix series I saw. It's like, okay, how did you learn how to scale it? And when did you realize, like, okay, we can't do this in individual stores anymore. It all has to be in one place and take it to the stores.
That's a good question. So I like to think about my life, especially when people go like, okay, but like, how do I get to where you are? And it's like, you have to follow your intuition, and you have to make sure that every decision you make, it doesn't have to be on one straight path. It can be a very curvy path. It can be really wide lanes, but you have to make sure you show up to whatever that path is every day and mean it. So when I think about answering that question, I go, well, every single day leading up to that trained me for that decision and learning how to do it. So when I was first deciding to work in kitchens, I would work in, like, kind of on some level in any kitchen that was compelling to me. And I got a job really early on before I moved to New York City. Someone convinced someone that I was a great baker, and I like tiny little stand mixer at home. And someone gave me a job running this huge bakery on an island off the coast of New Hampshire, where I had to cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 800 people every day. And I showed up, and in the spirit of like, you have to rise to the occasion, someone was like, here's the mixer. And it was this gigantic thing, and I was like, I have no clue how to run this.
You're used
And
to
I
a
was
small
like,
one, not a scale.
Yeah, the one that sits on your kitchen counter, but it's like, great, it's just like a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids moment. That's
Right.
fine. How hard could it be? You got to just lean into it. And I was like, great, so can you just give me the quick 1, 2, 3? How do you lift the bowl up, this, that, or the other? And I figured out how to do it. Went to New York, went into all this fine dining, never saw a mixer like that again, but in my mind was like, okay, I know how to feed the masses. So when we opened Milk Bar, there was a line out the door, and I was like, our kitchen
This
is
little thing
yeah,
over
our
to one at a
kitchen
time.
is
Like,
hugely undersized for the demand, and I was like, we're gonna need a bigger boat. And it was a lot easier to figure out what that bigger boat looked like because I just started going into my experience and memory of, okay, what does this mean? One day at a time, one step at a time, one huge mixing bowl at a time. Instead of buying, a little pack of butter, we buy a 30-pound case of butter. And instead of buying a 30-pound case of butter, we buy, like a 3,000-pound brick of butter.
Crazy.
And you just make it
3,000
happen.
brick?
A 3,000-pound brick. It comes like a
Really?
pallet
Shut up.
and I'm not joking.
it's not like a bunch of little bricks. It's one big thing.
one huge
They
thing.
make a big brick.
Well, how do you think they make the little sticks, dude? Like
they
it
cut it out the
comes, they
big
cut it out, brick.
Crazy.
But that
How much
part
does a
of it,
3,000-pound brick of butter cost?
that's a good question. I don't know. I'd have to check a dairy
I'm just
lane.
curious. It's crazy.
It's crazy.
How many cookies can that make?
But that's how big. I mean, batches and batches, hundreds of thousands of cookies.
Wow.
But that's also that's when you start to go, at some point, as you grow a business, you have to go, what are my bottlenecks? How do I work smarter, not harder? Mm-hmm. And you just have to equip yourself. I think for me, one of the biggest mental realizations was people do it every day, right? Like you're not necessarily any better or worse equipped than someone else. Whether the toilet's clogged or you need to move a light switch or the delivery van breaks down, right? Like these are people doing things, applicable things that they've learned in the world, and that empowerment of equipping yourself with as many skills as necessary to solve your problems is really important. And for me, those are the really fun parts. One, how do you scale up the compost cookie to go from this to that? Is trial and error, is trying to throw as much of your learnings as possible against it, and then learning along the way. Great, okay, so when we scale up, we need to always increase salt by 15%, or flour needs to, you have to be careful with it, or it's a bigger mixer, so you're gonna develop gluten because it takes more manpower, there's more friction that's working the dough, and cookie dough you want to kind of be mixed as little as possible so they're tender and fudgy. But it's
so good.
It is not being afraid to acknowledge the problem and to solve with it. It's to never work with the problem. But we went from this tiny store, 750 square feet. In New York, we have an 11,000 square foot kitchen. In DC, it's about 4,000 square feet. Here in LA, it's 3,000 square feet.
How many stores in LA?
Just one, just our flagship.
3,000 square feet for one store.
Yeah.
Well, are you going to expand to more then?
It's a good question. I don't know.
Venice, Santa Monica, it's got to get
I know. This is always whenever you hang out with someone that lives in LA, they're like, or just there's a shop right around the corner from my front door.
There is a place right down the street that just opened up. Yeah.
I don't know.
WeHo needs it.
It's the tricky part of knowing too much at this point, right?
What do you mean knowing too much?
Knowing too much, then now opening a store is totally different than what opening that first store
Why?
was. There's so much more on the line. I mean, you gotta know this, right? In your career, you work, and then once you start to actually achieve, there's more people counting on you. There's more to lose. There's more things to consider. There's
money involved, investors now.
Visibility, all these things. And your single decision is something that is responsible for so many other things. Aside from that, it's why do people love it? If it were on every corner, does it feel as special? You almost worry about breaking it as much as you worry about feeding it and supporting it and growing it. And so when that happens, then I'm like, all right, stop. You got to get out of your own head. Get out of the room, go for a run, whatever it is, because now you're treating it in a way that's so precious, and that's also not what it is.
Yeah.
But it is how do we inspire? The big question is how do we inspire celebration? How do we remind people, show people, be a part of people's lives in the big and little ways, especially the little ways for me, like whether it's cheat day, cheat morning with those birthday truffles, or the like, I just ran the marathon, or the like, I just got dumped, or I just broke up with someone, or I just bought my first car, whatever, the little things that you don't think about. I was on time to work today, whatever it was, right? Like the bigger little things, and being a part of that texture in people's lives. And what does that look like? For me, it's not about store count. It's not about measuring Milk Bar's success in any way other than trying to figure out how to measure those like really human connections, which are basically possible to measure. But for me, that's why I do it. That's what makes it worth it. And that's kind of what I'm always protecting. Of like, but I don't want 100, 200, 300 stores if it means, if we do it, we have to do it in a way that still maintains that philosophy, that isn't just about like, well, we're opening it because we can open it. And we
you don't want to lose the magic. Yeah.
The magic.
So what's the vision then? 17 stores right now. Do you call them stores, bakeries? What do you call them?
I don't. We all call
Change it
them
up.
something
Okay.
different.
17
Stores,
locations.
Milk bars.
Yeah, milk bars.
I mean, every store is different,
Yeah.
which is part of the formula, right? Like, we don't stamp them out. We have a roadmap, but it's really important that each one of them is their own like living, breathing thing. Yeah, that it's a reflection of the people that are a part of it. And I don't mean on the inside. I do mean on the inside, but I also mean we want to be a part of your life. So if you go to a store, you're part of that. What making that store what it is.
What's the vision then moving forward? You've been doing it for 11 years almost.
Almost 11 years.
And what's the next?
I mean, for me, Milk Bar, and it's in my most grand vision of it. And I've had to like go back to the dreamscape, because every time I get close to the dream, I'm like, girl, you got to set the bar a little bit further, a little bit further. So my current bar is to make Milk Bar a thing that would, the 10-year-old version of myself growing up in the suburbs of Ohio or Virginia, that Milk Bar's reach and presence is there to inspire the 10-year-old that is like, that loves cookies and loves doing things to make people feel like supported and a part of something, that loves walking up and down the aisles of the grocery store, that loves like digging into the cupboards and making a total mess. That milk, to make Milk Bar into a thing that a 10-year-old that just has the most basic normal access that anyone in this country might have in that setting, in that suburban setting, that it empowers that person to learn the rules and then maybe learn how to break them a little bit, or to say, cool, I get what a chocolate chip cookie is, but what if I like these other things? What if I put them in? Or I want to do something for someone, and it doesn't have to look like a vanilla cake with vanilla frosting, that it could be a reflection of the person, that it's an opportunity to really feed, to bring imagination in and to feed someone through this dessert. Which is a big one, but I also feel like in my head it makes perfect sense and it's not out of reach. Nothing's out of reach.
Wow. How do you continue to reinvent the dream as you get closer to it? What's the process for dreaming beyond the dream?
That's a good question. I'm very introspective. I'm actually an introvert, so I spend a lot of time, my like recharge time is spent alone. Usually on a run, baking alone, going on a run alone. So a lot of it is, I leave my house in the morning, leave my apartment in the morning. I'm like, okay, you have to let that go, and you have to go and be a person for people. But a lot of that like dream setting and measuring and swimming around in my own head happens when I'm alone and on my own, which is usually late at night or early in the morning.
Wow.
And I gut check. I'm a very big, I talk about like November 15th, 2008. I had no time to gut check. It was just guttural. I do all of my editing, whether it's editing a recipe or editing a plan for the business, or editing that like big dream. It happens when I'm on my own, and I run things through my mind.
Isn't it crazy? Whenever I'm running by myself as well, I get the best ideas. I'm allowed to, I give myself space to reflect on what's working, what's not working, and start to redream as well.
Yeah, and it's not like a to-do list thing. It's not like, all right, so tonight when you're running, this is what we're going to go through in our head, right? It's almost like letting yourself just be instead of do. It's like being versus doing.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Running is big for you in that space, huh?
It allows me to clear everything in my mind. You know, even if sometimes I'll listen to music, sometimes I'll listen to an interview, or sometimes I'll do nothing. And all 3 times I get ideas, and I start to reevaluate what's happening in my life, good and bad or neutral. Just start to reimagine.
It's a meditative space.
Very meditative.
Do you meditate on the regular?
Yeah. I mean, I like to say that I'm very consistent, but I miss some days here and there. But I try to do 13 to 15 minutes every morning.
Oh, you're so good.
Try to.
Yeah.
I missed this morning, but yeah.
But the missing is also like the humanity of it. Like,
I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
I'm not going to hit the same routine every single day. I do my best.
Yeah.
But a workout, I feel like, is the most meditative thing I can do.
Yeah.
Because it processes any negative energy or any toxic energy or anything. It just kind of gets it out.
I like that. It's true. It's that for me, and it's also this, I think there's like, for me, I take an insane amount of empowerment in running long distances, because there's something about like, once I get in motion, this sense of telling myself and having the relationship with myself, like, you can go forever. You can go forever. It's mind over matter. And also this, you can do anything. You can do anything, you have to just start. Like taking that first step or the second step or the third step in the running for me is like, it's not hard to do, but once I've taken the first 3 steps, it could have been my millionth step. It's that like mentality of empowerment of like, just start. Once you start, you'll figure everything else out. You don't have to have all the answers.
For me, I'm not a distance guy. I'll run maybe 4 or 5 miles max on like once or twice.
That's a really long amount for most people. I like that you're like, that's not distance, which depending on
3 miles is
in a
like,
vacuum, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm more of a sprinter or like interval sprinting. So if I do a 3 or 4 mile run, the first 2 minutes is easy. It's like right after when I hit mile 1.5, it starts to like hurt. And then I'm like, okay, I can either stop here or I can continue to push through it. And when I push through the pain and the adversity and I get on the other side, it's like I feel like I can run forever. Forever for me is like another 2 miles, right? But it's like I feel like I can run farther than I'm used to running, which is 2.5 or 3 miles. I can go 4, 4.5, 5. And I hit that zone as well where it doesn't hurt anymore. Yeah,
it's almost like you learn every time anew to quiet the voice in your head, like the naysayer in your head. You're like, we're not going to do that right now. But whether you're doing like sprints or intervals or whatever it is, I feel like it's the same thing of like, we're not going to let that voice kind of like the voices in my head, right? Like the personalities that you hold. We're not going to do that right now. We're just going to be quiet.
What's the worst voice that you have, and what's the best voice?
I think the best voice is the one that just like puts a smile on my face. I went for a run yesterday morning, and I was like, I think everyone on the street right now must think I'm a lunatic, because it's the most quiet voice that I was just smiling. I'm like running up a huge hill, just smiling, just so happy and at peace. It's the voice that almost doesn't have a voice. It's the voice that just keeps all the other voices quiet. I think the worst voice is the one that's hypercritical. Whether it's like, you didn't meditate today. That's a problem. Or this or that, or you're not this enough, or you're not that enough, or you coulda, woulda, shoulda. And I think the best voice is the one that's like, oh, I see you. Shh, we're going to be quiet. Just be quiet. And I think talking about it and acknowledging it is a big part of it. Because whether you're talking about working out, you're talking about building a business, you're talking about finding your calling and just in the pursuit of engaging with it, what do they say? Like showing up is 80% or 90% of it. And like learning to, showing up, I think, is letting that, your strongest, most powerful voice, which is your quieting voice, tell everything else to be quiet.
Percentage-wise, throughout your day, what's the percentage of the critical voice versus the positive voice, would you say?
Depends on the day. I am at my best when I know that my relationship with myself is that I'm at my best when I'm in just like a little over my head, where my drive to be like, you got to keep your head up above water, you got to keep your head up above water, is like my middle voice that keeps the critical voice quiet. So I'd say the critical voice comes out most at night and in the morning when I'm quiet and I'm by myself.
Really?
I try to keep it out of the way the rest of the day by going like, hey, great, why don't you build this bakery into this big, magic, magnificent thing?
Wow.
And when I'm focused on that, it'll usually quell everything else, especially the voice that you're like,
Because you're just focused on
just
taking
focused.
action and making it happen and figuring it
I'm
out.
focused. I have my team. I want to serve them. I want them to feel motivated. I want to push them so that they're motivating themselves. I have all these other things I'm worried about that are in front of me, as opposed to
Worrying
letting
about yourself,
that. Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that interesting that you say you love being an introvert, but the times you're alone, you're the most critical person.
It makes no sense.
But you
right?
like being alone.
Yeah.
Why do you like being alone if you're critical of yourself?
I think it's the time that I get to know myself most. I think when you're out, when I'm out all the time, I don't have like a stopping point to check in with myself because I'm just like go, 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 go. And that stopping point to check in with myself is the place where I have the opportunity to feel the most accomplished. Because I don't want or need somebody else's recognition to tell me about me and where I'm at and how I'm feeling about the job that I'm doing. It's the place where I have the opportunity for that when I'm alone. But the tricky part is it's also the place where like the bad voices have the opportunity to sneak into.
Huh. Do you think you would be as driven and successful as you are if you weren't critical in those alone times?
No.
So if you
Because
were
I wouldn't have
positive-
my own measure, right? Like if you don't have your own measure of what right from wrong is, what you want to set up, where you're falling short, then how do you know? Then you have no measure. Then good and bad is all the same thing. Right and wrong is all the same thing. But it's also tricky because you have to be a person in the world and you can't just measure your own feedback for yourself. One of like the big things that I've really learned over the past 10 years is it's easy to get defensive when you're like, no, I'm my own worst enemy, so I don't actually need you to give me feedback, right? And to open yourself up a bit more to start to understand the things you don't know. You only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know.
Wow.
That's an interesting balance.
So wait, did you say you don't care about the approval of anyone else?
That's not how I measure my own success. I think that approval, winning awards, this and that, I think that those are things that are like nice to haves. They're nice to haves for my team. Sometimes I think about my day or the commitments I make in terms of like, it's not just me anymore, right? Like there are people that show up every single day and make a promise, and I need to make a promise to me and to Milk Bar, and it's really important that it's a two-way street, that I'm making a promise to them. But also if something bad comes out, if a piece of criticism comes out, it also can't mean that you're a total failure. You have to find a space for those two things to exist. I think I always say to the team, like, their perception is our reality. If someone has something positive to say, that's great, but that can't be the only thing. But also if someone has something negative to say, there's truth somewhere in it. And that's an opportunity. And we shouldn't have our guards up so much where we're our only barometers of success and measure, that we're not open to that.
Yeah.
And that's where you start to really feel like you're growing and blossoming a bit more. It's a scary place to be, but it's a really good place to be too.
What's the biggest thing you learned about yourself in the last 11 years?
That's a good one. The biggest thing that I've learned about myself is that I only know what I know. And some days that's a lot, and some days it's just the beginning. And that I think comes from, when you're in your 20s, you're feeling great about life. You're feeling yourself like big time. And that it's such an empowering like decade of years. And in a really beautiful way, it's so easy to be like, to feel great and feel big and to very quickly have that turn into like defense or closing yourself off to all of the things that you will surely learn in your 30s and in your 40s or whatever it is. And I think when people ask like, what's your biggest mistake? Would you ever change anything? It's like, no, but I would love to be able to go back to my 20s and just like tap myself and be like, hey girlfriend, like what you're doing is great and keep going. But like let people in, let the conflict in a little bit more, let the criticism in a little bit more, because you're so much better off when you do.
Really? So you weren't letting any criticism in?
I think I was doing the like, I'm on my long distance run, like I've got my armor on, every day is a battle, opening this business and going, and like I have to have my back first, like on an extra level. And I think the second you start to actually open yourself up to let other people be a part of that dream and that vision and that business in your life, when you let people be with you, you're so much better for it. Yeah. And so I was a bit more, I'm a very stubborn person in general, but I was incredibly stubborn in my 20s. And stubborn is what, I mean, on the tiniest purse string is also what drove me to make Milk Bar what it is and why Milk Bar is what it is on many levels. But it's opportunity and threat at the same time. Like if I didn't have that, like no one gets to tell me who I am and who I'm not, what I'm capable of, what's possible. I mean, in 2008, someone being like, you have how much money in your bank account? You're going to open a bakery? That sounds like a really bad idea. Yeah. I mean, my sweet parents were like, oh my God. We gave you so much opportunity. Why do you want to go work in kitchens? And why this bakery? Like, can't you go be like a doctor or a lawyer? Can't you do the safe thing? And I both needed to be really stubborn and closed-minded from other people's opinions to be able to hear myself. But at the same time, I look back and go, oh my God, what worked for me back then does not work for me today. And if I hadn't figured it out, would have been holding me back so much.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are you most proud of that you've done?
This is like, I feel like such a hilarious old lady saying it. Well, one of my biggest pieces of pride from the past few months was we just started offering a 401k program at Milk Bar, which is like, when you work in restaurants, you give it your all. It's a labor of love. Restaurant, like the word restaurant is restorative, right? Like people come to be restored. But in a really tricky way, people don't typically, you don't take care of yourself because you're working crazy long hours on your feet all the time. It's stressful and strenuous and yelly and screamy usually, and like all of these things. And there's typically not a program put in place to take, your job is to restore all these other people, and that's why you love doing it. You love feeding and nurturing. But who has your back, I think, is the question that I started asking myself or realizing. And that was like, we offer health insurance and maternity and paternity and all of these other things, but the 401k for me was like, what if when you came into the doors of Milk Bar, you never had to write, you never had to go for another job interview, you never had to write another resume? Like, what if when we grew, you grew? What if Milk Bar is a true reflection of all the people that work in it? And in order to do that, you got to come in and make a promise every day, but I got to make a promise to you. Oh, wow. And I want to have your back. And I think that's the one thing when you work in the food industry, you don't really think about the future because you're just so happy in this labor of love. And that was for me like the ultimate. It took a long time and it's not cheap and it is so worth it. And it's like that part of it is the funniest part of it, because looking back 10 years ago, I mean, I would never, it wouldn't even occur to me that I thought I was opening this bakery because I love to feed people and be a part of people's lives, and I do. I think the people's lives that I underestimated, I would become obsessed with being a part of, was my own teams. It was the people that helped me bring it to life.
How many people are working in Milk Bar?
320, 30.
Wow.
It grows every day.
Crazy.
It's crazy.
300 people.
And super cool.
It's amazing. It's
amazing.
amazing.
Yeah.
The first one started with 4 or 5 of you.
Yeah.
17 locations. So you have people working in the storefront, and then you have people working in the, I guess, what do we call it, the bakeries?
In the kitchens. We have people that run like the delivery teams, driving the cookies and the cakes and the pies. We have the shipping and you're on it. You're like you're already ready to be the director of operations at one part. Shipping and fulfillment, and then we have the other like sticky teams of when we're at like an Oscar party. The stores are still open and this, that, and the other, and so we have so many other unsung heroes on the team as well.
Like caterers that are going to these events. Wow.
They'll like show up high kicking and high fiving, and they work their butts off so that when they're there, they have a blast, and they want you to have a blast too.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
When do you feel the most loved?
When do I feel the most loved? Ooh, that's a great question. I feel the most loved when I receive a care package from my mom.
Wow.
She sends me, I'm like technically a grown-up. She sends me, it sounds funny, but like she sends me a care package. It's usually once a month or once every 2 months. She sees me in obviously a very true form of myself. She's known me my entire life. She sends me, I kid you not, a bag of like little candy, like almost penny candy. So like if it's, it's a little bag of Reese's Pieces or it's a tiny little Twix bar, whatever. She sends me that. She typically sends me a baked good. Like she'll send me a 9x9 square aluminum pan of
brownie
like
or something.
gooey butter cake, brownie, whatever it is. And she knows that I like everything a little, from the Midwest.
I love the gooiness.
Underbaked. It has to be underbaked. And so then usually it's like.
Can't to the edges.
No. And so it's usually all smushed on one side because she doesn't have like a master shipping warehouse the way that we do, right? It's always she lives in the DC area, a bunch of DC food sections, which is her way of pursuing me, being like, I get it and I support your dream. She always writes me a letter, and it's always on some random piece of scrap paper because she's totally a waste not, want not lady. Wow. And it's about whatever random thing she was doing that day, right? There's nothing big about it. It's just the texture of that day and that moment in life. And then maybe there's like a baby quilt because we have this tradition in our family. My family, they're all sewers and quilters, and they make baby quilts so anyone that we know that's having a baby gets a baby quilt that's made by hand by the women in my family. It's these layers and blankets of like visibility and acceptance. That's when I feel the most loved because it's like it feels like I know that I've been the same person. Since the moment I left home, I've been the same person. She sends the same care package, and it doesn't matter to her. It doesn't matter to her that she's sending it to this huge office in New York City now. It doesn't matter to her that she's sending a baked good that's totally smushed on one side to a place that has plenty of baked goods. It doesn't matter to her. That's when I feel the most loved, because I feel the most seen.
Huh. You feel the most seen by your mom.
Yeah, and it's always in a cardboard box that's been used 6 times. You know, like the Sharpie on the side, like it was like an Amazon package, and then it was this, and then it was that. And I love it because she's also very stubborn, where she's like, oh, I see you. Oh, I see you. And it also for me is like the best. I feel the most loved because it's also the biggest anchor for me in a day. To get that, to open it, to share it with the team, to put the newspaper things out, and people are like, what is this? And it's like, my mom, and I usually do like the roll of the eye, like, you can't take her anywhere kind of thing, but.
It reminds me of camp. When I was growing up, I go to camp, and I get care packages, and it reminds me of home and feeling loved as well. There needs to be a business around care packages.
I mean, milkbarstore.com. That for me is like the other part of Milk Bar is what we do online that a lot of people know, but I think we're still getting out is it's easy from a business standpoint to be like, it's e-com, right? Like that's the business term. But for me, it's like the spirit of a care package of
feeling loved and seen and home.
Yeah, and some people like in a beautiful way, like send themselves a cake. And they're like, hey girl, keep doing it.
Wow.
So you can see it. You can see it as we're packing it. And for me, that's
cool.
fuel. That's like the inspiration.
How many? So these are care packages. You can send yourself anything, or do you have kind of like pre-planned?
We
packages?
have. You can send almost anything on our menu. We don't ship the cereal milk soft serve,
Right.
but we ship pretty much anything else.
Do you guys do like scrap paper notes? Do you do quilts?
We'll write a note. We should totally do quilts. My
You should
mom
put
would
the
be
quilt
like,
in there.
girlfriend.
Put like a little mini square.
I do. Well, I
And
send
put some like Reese's
that's a good
Pieces. Like
one.
every box gets like a little candy thing.
Oh my God, do you want to be the creative director
gotta
of
be-
Milk Bar?
Exactly.
We'd make a great team.
But I'm telling you, this would go even better, I think. If you
love
added
this.
like little Reese's Pieces or a Kit Kat or whatever it is,
Yeah.
like every box
Just
got
this
just a
tiny
little
little
thing
thing.
of candy. Every box got a little square of a quilt and a little wrapped off note.
Yeah.
It's just like a quote.
Yes.
Something that's like you're loved and seen.
I love this.
And it adds a more like
see
homey,
you. I got
less
you.
corporate-y, feeling.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, right? Like, I got you.
And the
These
batter's gotta be a
humans
little
are
bit to
here
the
to
side,
pack. Yeah, exactly. I feel like someone would be
messing up
mad
on
if their
purpose.
crack pie was like a little, they'd be like, that's not what it looked like in the
Right,
picture when I
right,
ordered
exactly.
it. Okay, fine. But yeah, the like, what else goes in the box is the question that hilariously we're asking ourselves. And that's the fun part of building the business too, is like bringing that part of being seen in. Or sometimes the team is like, Christina, we can't do that.
Right.
And asking like,
Can
but
you?
why can't we? Tell me why.
You couldn't do cereal milk either.
Yeah, there you go. Also, you couldn't pay rent off of selling $3 cookies, but
Exactly.
somehow we do it.
So how many care packages do you ship a day? Do you know?
Oh my gosh, it depends. Over the holiday season, I
Nice.
mean hundreds of thousands.
Wow.
We this past holiday season was our biggest one. And the only way we could make it work, even in our big kitchen in New York, because we ship some out of LA, the LA kitchen, some out of and the rest out of the New York City kitchen. We hired these trucks that were refrigerated to literally just drive around to keep the packages cold until UPS or FedEx or the
Shut
Postal
up.
Service came to pick it up.
Because you didn't have enough freezer space.
We don't have enough fridge or freezer
Oh my
space,
gosh.
right? Like that's when you're like, this
Innovation
is
right
the
there.
yeah, and also like this is the coolest thing. And I look at that and I go, I wonder if 10-year-old Christina got one of those in the mail. And it's like, probably not. We got to keep going.
Wow.
But that was like that's the like we make things funny to keep it real. Obviously, it's stressful trying to figure that out, plan for it,
Logistics.
package day and night. But when we take a step back, being like, we literally had trucks driving around our kitchens to keep the packages
24/7,
cold because that's how many people came out for their
That's
care, for
pretty
their
cool.
holiday care package.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I've got 3 final questions for you. This one's called the 3 truths.
Okay.
So imagine you've accomplished everything you've ever dreamed of. And every dream you get closer to, you have to reinvent the new dream and dream bigger. And you achieve everything you want that you can think of. But one day, you have to go. You know, it could be 100 years from now, it could be whenever. But let's
I have to say goodbye to the world.
You gotta go to, another place, wherever you go to.
Got it.
You gotta die. And you've accomplished everything. And for whatever reason, all of your message that you put out to the world, this interview, videos, Netflix, whatever books, everything you've put out in the world, you've got to take it all with you. So no one has your message anymore. No one has like your words, written, audio, video. But you get to write down on a piece of paper this final day 3 things you know to be true about all of the lessons you've learned that you would share with the world. Your 3 truths or lessons. What would you say are yours?
I showed up, I meant it, I made it better. That and like I was like, oh my gosh, how am I gonna do this? That is my measure of a day. And similar to like, I like to think I meditate every day. I don't, I try to do it regularly. The thing I try and do regularly is when I check in with myself before I go to bed and I'm like looking to my own internal voice is like, did you show up? Did you mean it? More than anything else, did you make it better? And that can be, it's applicable to everything, big and small, especially the small.
I like that.
Yeah.
Before I ask the final 2 questions, how can we support you? Where can we follow you? How can we show up to Milk Bar in person, online?
I love you. Got to come hang out.
I know.
Get
I need
that
to go to the
care
store.
package.
She lives right across the street from in Miracle Mile area. Yeah.
Get that care package. Okay.
So you can get a care package online.
Yeah, milkbarstore.com is our handle, is our website. all of our social handles, our website. My handle's just my first last name, Christina Tozzi. You can go to christinatozzi.com. I have a bi-weekly newsletter that I try to just show up, mean it, and make it better in the world, and just kind of like share my own personal path of whatever random thing I find joy in the moment, or I discovered in my week or two. Come out and visit us in the stores. For me, it's like, come out in the morning, come out late at night, like come and see us and show up, and like we want to connect with you. Let us connect with you. Show up, and don't show up prepared almost. That's like my request. Show up unprepared, show up curious, show up like ready to take a leap with us, or send someone some love in the mail.
Yeah, it's an experience, so make sure you guys go and check it out and try and sample a few things. What are the main cities you guys are in? New York,
LA, DC, Las Vegas,
All right.
at the Cosmopolitan.
Nice.
And we have a fun little refrigerated cube of a store in Toronto.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any good expansion in the Midwest?
Oh my gosh, in Boston. What am I talking about? We
Just
just opened a
opened
store in
Harvard
Boston.
Square, right?
I was just there.
Yeah.
This is the what day of the week is it? I don't even know. Boston, Harvard Square, so much.
Are you going to open up in the Midwest at all?
I mean, that's my Christina as a inspiring the Christina as a 10-year-old. What is that? How does Milk Bar get to the Midwest? For me, that's where it all began. That's why the corn cookie exists. Growing up in the cornfields of Ohio is that is the ultimate love letter. That's when we'll know. That's one of the dreams. How do we get Milk Bar to the
When you
Midwest?
open it up in Columbus, I'll go there.
We'll all show up for the opening, right?
I'm in. Well, I want to acknowledge you, Christina, for your creativity, your curiosity, and for showing up.
Thank
because I think it's hard coming from the Midwest and having these big dreams and actually pursuing it. But you pursued a craft that you thought you were supposed to take for so many years, and you realized, okay, this is a great job, but it's not where I ultimately want to be. And almost everyone said it was kind of crazy to go make cookies now, but you did it anyways, and look what you've created. You've inspired so many people, so I acknowledge you for everything. I acknowledge you for showing up as a rainbow, even though I know you said there's a lot of darkness that happens day to day, and challenges you have to go through, and the grit that you have to make this happen after 11 years. It's a lot of work. So I acknowledge you for all the work you've done. My final question is, what's your definition of greatness?
I think my definition of greatness is being able to sit with myself and smile. Be happy. To find happiness in just being alone, because I'm an introvert.
Being
That
happy
is
alone.
greatness.
Yeah.
That, for me, that's greatness. That's something I always wanted to make sure I had in life. And if that's what I leave as my mark, or the thing that I have that I know I checked off, that is greatness for me.
Finding your purpose needs to be the most important mission of your life. I always say, if you're not walking in your purpose, you're just working and living to die. And I hope it shakes people to the core when they hear that.